The sun was a hammer. It beat the color out of the sky, leaving a flat, bleached white canvas that shimmered with heat. Down below, the land was no better. Red dust, fine as powdered rust, coated everything. It coated the brittle remains of cactus skeletons, the sharp volcanic rock, and the woman sitting on the parched earth beside the wreckage of her hopes. Her name was Sarah Mitchum. She was 26 years old, a widow for 2 years, and an orphan for 1 month. The dust stuck to the sweat on her face, caking in her eyelashes and the folds of her worn calico dress. She was alone, which was a state she had sought, though not precisely in this manner. She had been aiming for Tucson. Her aunt, her mother's last living sister, was there. It was a place to land, a place to breathe after the suffocating propriety of St. Louis, after the polite, hollow condolences for her husband, followed by the sharper, more terrible grief for her father. Her father, at least, had understood her. He had understood her quiet refusal to marry again, to slip back into the cage of being some man's dependent. You always did have a spine. Sarah, he had said, his voice thinned by sickness, go, find your own piece of sky. Now, her piece of sky was a blinding furnace, and her spine felt as cracked as the timber beside her. The jolt had thrown her clear. One moment, the wagon was lurching and rattling down the hard-packed trail that snaked toward the Gila River. The next, a sound like a pistol shot echoed from beneath the floorboards. The wagon box tilted violently. Splintering wood screamed, and she was airborne. She had landed hard on her left side, her hand and wrist taking the full, brutal impact against the unyielding ground. Pain, sharp and immediate, had lanced up her arm. She had cried out, a thin, dry sound that the desert swallowed instantly. Her 2 mules, Jed and Samson, were still tethered to the splintered traces, braying in terror. They kicked and pulled, their eyes wide and white. The wagon itself was a ruin. The left rear wheel was canted at a drunken angle. The thick oak axle split clean in 2. It was not a break that could be mended with wire and hope. It was an end. She had spent the first hour in a fog of panic, trying to calm the mules, trying to assess the damage, trying to think. But the heat pressed down, a physical weight that stole thought. The pain in her wrist had subsided from a sharp crackle to a deep, profound ache that made her feel nauseous. It was already swelling, a grotesque puffiness distorting the line of her glove. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her despite the heat, that it was broken. A broken axle, a broken wrist, a broken plan. She looked at her canteen, resting on the patch of shade offered by the wagon's corpse. She had half filled it at dawn from a brackish water hole. It was not enough, not for a day, maybe not even for the rest of the afternoon. Thirst was a new kind of fear, different from the fear of gossip or poverty. It was primal. It was a dry, scratching presence at the back of her throat. The world had shrunk to this, the buzzing of a fly, the frantic stamp of a mule's hoof, the relentless, white-hot sun, and the throb in her arm. This, she thought with a flash of bitter humor, was her living authentically, miles away, in a direction she could not have pointed to. Deputy Marshal Abel Crow swung down from his horse. The animal was dark with sweat, but Crow himself looked untouched by the heat. He was a tall, spare man, built of whipcord and jerky, with eyes the color of a faded denim shirt. They were eyes that saw everything and approved of very little. He was at the Maricopa Wells Station, a collection of low adobe buildings that smelled of sour beer, unwashed men, and alkali dust. He had just collected the bounty on 2 brothers who had made the mistake of stealing Army payroll. He folded the bills with methodical precision, his movements neat, economical. A sergeant, his face flushed with whiskey, though it was barely noon, watched him. You heading back to Prescott, Marshal? Crow tucked the money into his vest. He did not look at the sergeant, but at a corner of the dim cantina. A young trooper sat there, his arm draped around a local woman. Her skin was the color of warm brown bread, and she was laughing, her teeth very white. Crow's expression, already severe, tightened. There is filth on this trail. I am riding toward the Gila. Word is a man named Gallant is running guns to the reservation. Gallant, the sergeant snorted. He ain't nothing, just a half-breed traitor. The word half-breed hung in the air. Crow's pale eyes flicked to the soldier and the woman. There is no such thing as half-sergeant. There is only right and wrong, clean and unclean. The law is the line between them. Some people forget where that line is drawn. He walked out, his spurs ringing softly, a man carrying a righteous and terrible certainty. He mounted his horse and turned it south, toward the Gila, a solitary, rigid figure moving through a land that tolerated everything he despised. The sun had passed its zenith. Sarah was sitting with her back against the broken wheel, her head bowed. The patch of shade had shrunk to almost nothing. She had rationed 2 sips of the lukewarm, metallic water. It had not helped. She was beginning to feel lightheaded. The world was tilting. The red rocks in the distance seemed to ripple, as if they, too, were melting. She must have dozed, a sick, shallow sleep, because when she opened her eyes, he was there. He was not a mirage. Mirages did not make the mules go still. Their ears pricked forward, their bodies rigid with a new kind of fear. He sat on a paint horse, a spotted, muscular animal with no saddle and only a simple rope bridle. The man was perhaps 30 yards away, just sitting, watching her. He was Apache. Everything she had ever been told, every story whispered over a sewing circle, every sensational headline in the St. Louis papers, screamed at her, savage, murderer. Worse. He wore hide leggings and a simple cloth shirt. His black hair was held back by a strip of cloth. A rifle rested in the crook of his arm. He was lean, like the land itself, and he seemed to be part of it, a man sculpted from the same red rock and hard sun that was trying to kill her. She froze. Her heart, which had been beating a slow, thick rhythm, kicked into a frantic pace that sent a fresh wave of sickness through her. She did not move. She did not breathe. He did not move either. He just watched. He watched the broken wagon. He watched the terrified mules. He watched her, his gaze missing nothing, least of all the unnatural angle of her left arm, which she cradled against her waist. This was Nantan. He was a man who belonged nowhere. He had been cast out by his own people for refusing to take part in a raid on a settler's homestead, a raid he had seen as pointless and cruel, a violation of his own code. But to the white world, he was just another Apache, a threat to be shot on sight. He lived in the seams, in the empty spaces between the 2 worlds that both rejected him. He had seen the wagon tracks 2 miles back. He had seen the fresh break. He had followed, cautious, expecting an ambush, or at least a man with a rifle. He saw only this woman, white, alone, and broken. Helping her was a profound risk. It was an invitation for a posse, for a rope. Men like Abel Crow existed to enforce the lines. And Nantan, an Apache warrior, helping a white widow, was an obliteration of those lines. He knew the danger. He could smell it, as clearly as he could smell the ozone from a distant, dry thunderstorm. But he also saw her thirst. He saw the swelling of her wrist. He saw the end of her story written in the white-hot sky if she stayed here. Slowly, he dismounted. He did not drop the reins. The horse stood. Trained, he took 2 steps toward her, then stopped, keeping a wide, respectful distance. Sarah flinched, scrambling backward until her shoulders hit the wagon wheel. He stopped instantly. He held up one hand, palm empty. "Do not fear," he said. His voice startled her more than his appearance. It was deep and quiet. He spoke English. It was not the broken, guttural speech of the dime novels. It was measured, careful, each word holding its own space, the rhythm of his own language shaping the new one. "I am not here to harm you," he said. Sarah could only stare. Her mind was a whirlwind of prejudice and desperate need. "Go away," she whispered, the words dry and rasping. He ignored this. His dark eyes moved over her. A clinical, detached assessment. "Your arm is broken." It was not a question. It was a fact. "The axle is split. You cannot fix this." Another fact. He looked at her canteen. Then he looked at the sun. "You have little water. You will die here." The brutal honesty of it stripped away her last layer of civilized pretense. Tears of pain, fear, and frustration welled, thick and hot, leaving clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "Please," she said, though she did not know what she was asking for. For him to go, for him to help. Nantan looked at her, his face unreadable. He saw her fear of him, and he understood it. He had seen it many times. It was a weapon used against his people, and a shield used by hers. But right now, it was a useless thing. The sun did not care about her fear. The thirst did not care. He had a choice. He could ride on. He could leave her to her fate, a fate she had been assigned by her broken wagon. It was the safe choice. It was the logical choice for a man in his position. Or he could help. He could take this white woman, this symbol of the world that hunted him, and choose to save her. It was a choice that would certainly bring trouble. Sarah watched him, her breath held tight in her chest. She saw the conflict in his stillness. He was not a simple, savage man. He was a man weighing consequences she could not even guess at. He turned his head, looking back down the trail he had come, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He was looking for dust. He was looking for the arrival of the very danger he was contemplating inviting. Then he looked back at her. His eyes met hers. And for the first time, she saw something beyond the warrior. She saw a profound, weary intelligence. A man who was as alone, in his way, as she was in hers. The sun beat down. The broken wagon creaked. The two of them, a man and a woman from worlds at war, stood in the ruins, balanced on the knife edge of a decision. Nantan's gaze did not waver. He looked from her to the sun, a white disk of judgment in the bleached sky. "That," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the dry air, "will not wait for you." And that, he gestured with his chin toward her swollen, misshapen wrist, will not heal on its own. He pointed, not at her, but toward the hazy, broken line of mesas to the north. "There is a place, an old ranch house, made of earth. It has shade, it has no water, but I have a little left." He touched a hide waterskin tied to his horse's flank. "You can stay here. Wait, perhaps a freight wagon will come. Perhaps not." The words hung in the silence. Perhaps not. Sarah looked at the wagon, the symbol of her failed independence. She looked at the trail, an empty ribbon of red dust. She looked at the sky, vast and merciless. The thirst was a tightening wire around her throat. To stay was a gamble against a house that always won. Nantan watched her. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the war between her deep, ingrained terror of him and the more immediate, primal terror of the desert. He was about to turn away, to leave her to the choice she had to make, but he paused and added one more thing. "It is for you to say, stay or go. The choice is yours." He was not taking her. He was not capturing her. He was offering a path. He was giving her the one thing she had come west to find, her own agency, offered in the most terrible of circumstances. The throb in her wrist pulsed in time with her heart. She thought of her father. Find your own piece of sky. This man, this stranger, was the only thing between her and the hard, hot ground. "I will go," she whispered, the words scratching her throat. He nodded once, a short, final movement, first the arm. He walked to the ruined wagon. He did not ask permission. He moved with an economy of motion, touching nothing he did not need. He tested a thick splintered piece of the axle, then discarded it. He found a section of the wagon box frame, lighter timber, and with his knife, which he pulled from his belt with a fluid motion that made her flinch, he began to work. He did not use it as a weapon, but as a tool, splitting 2 flat, smooth lengths of wood, each about a foot long. He came back to her. He knelt. Sarah tensed, pulling her good arm across her chest. He was close now. She could smell him. He smelled of horse and sweat and leather and something else, something sharp and clean, like crushed sage. "This will hurt," he said. It was not an apology. "I need cloth to bind it." She looked down at her dress. It was stained and torn from the fall, but it was all she had. There was nothing to spare. Then she remembered her petticoat. It was an intimate, hidden thing. She nodded, fumbling with the buttons at her waist with her good hand, trying to turn away. "No," he said, stopping her. "The hem is enough." He indicated the bottom of her heavy skirt. She grasped the dusty calico and tore. The fabric was tough, but she managed to rip a long strip. "More," he said. She knew what he meant. She reached beneath her skirt and found the hem of her cotton petticoat. It ripped more easily. It felt like a strange surrender, tearing her hidden garments for this man. She ripped 2 long, white strips and handed them to him. He laid the wood splints and the cloth strips on the ground beside him, organizing them with the care of a craftsman. "Give me the arm." She hesitated, her entire body trembling. Then, closing her eyes tight, she extended her left arm. He did not coddle her. His grip was not gentle, but it was profoundly certain. His one hand held her elbow, grounding her. His other took her damaged hand. She felt his thumbs find the brake. She inhaled to scream. He pulled, a single agonizing, efficient motion. A wet, grinding sound came from her own body. The pain was a flash of white light, so intense it eclipsed the sun. A strangled sob tore from her throat. And then it was done. He worked faster than she could have believed. His fingers were deft. He laid the splints on either side of the brake, holding it straight. He wrapped the strips of her dress and her petticoat, binding the wood tight. His knots complex and secure. He had set her arm. She was shaking violently, tears of pure, physical shock streaming down her face. The arm was a massive, booming drum of pain, but it was contained. It was straight. He stood up, retrieving his water skin. He unstopped it and held it out. A little, not much. She drank. The water was warm and tasted of hide, but it was life. It was relief so profound it was almost as painful as the setting of the bone. She wanted to drain it, but she stopped herself after 2 swallows. She looked at her mules. Jed and Samson. They were watching, their heads low, their sides heaving. The mules. She whispered, "We cannot just leave them." Nantan looked at the animals, his face impassive. "We cannot take them. We cannot free them. If we free them, they will run until their hearts burst, or they will stay by the wagon until they die of thirst. We take the horse. It is all the land will allow." "It is brutal," she said, looking away from their large, patient eyes. "It is honest," Nantan replied. "The desert does not lie. It makes no promises it cannot keep. Wolves will come. It is the law of this place." Sarah felt a cold dread, a different kind from before. This was the coldness of reality, of a world that did not care about her sensibilities. She nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. Nantan turned to his horse. He unstrapped his bedroll and a small pouch, securing them again. He motioned for her to stand. She tried, her legs, stiff for hours, buckled. She was weaker than she knew. Before she could fall, he was there. He put his hands on her waist, and with no visible effort, he lifted her. It was not a gesture of intimacy, but of pure function. He lifted her as one might lift a sack of grain. He placed her on the horse's bare back, astride, like a man. She blushed. a hot wave of shame that was quickly burned away by the heat and the pain. He mounted behind her, swinging his leg over the horse's rump. She was pressed back against his chest. Her good hand gripped the horse's mane, her other arm. Heavy and strange in its splint, she cradled against her stomach. He nudged the horse with his heels. The animal, strong and sure-footed, began to walk. They moved away from the wreck. They left the wagon, her father's last gift. They left the mules, her last connection to her old life. Sarah did not look back. She could not bear to. The journey was a blur of misery. Every step of the horse sent a jolt of fire up her splinted arm. The sun beat on her head. She had no bonnet. She felt her skin tightening, blistering. Nantan was a silent, solid presence behind her. He held the rope bridle in one hand, the other rested on his thigh, near his knife. His head, she noticed, was never still. He was constantly scanning the ridges, the arroyos, the shimmering curtains of heat. He was a man moving through enemy territory. The land itself was an adversary, a third presence in their desperate company, watching, waiting for them to make a mistake. She must have fainted or slipped into a haze of pain. The world went dark. She was falling. A hand gripped her shoulder. Hard. Drink. His voice cut through the fog. He was holding the water skin to her lips. She swallowed, the water reviving her. "We are close," he said. She looked up. The sun was lower, painting the western clouds in shades of apricot and blood. The air was cooler. They had moved into a shallow valley, a cut in the earth where shadows were gathering. Ahead, she saw it, a building, or the ghost of one. It was a low, sagging ranch house, its adobe walls the color of the earth they came from. The roof was mostly intact, a few ribs of wood showing through. The corral fence was just a scatter of broken timber. Beside the house, a single, skeletal cottonwood tree stood over a dry, stone-lined well. Nantan slid off the horse. He stood beside her. "We are here." She tried to dismount, but her legs had no strength. She began to slide, but he caught her, easing her down until her feet touched the ground. She sagged against him, and for a moment, he held her weight. He supported her as she staggered through the empty, doorless frame into the gloom inside. The house was one room. It smelled of rat droppings, dry rot, and the ghosts of old fires. Dust lay thick on everything. In one corner, a simple fireplace, its mouth black with soot, its hearth cold. In the other, a wooden frame, shaped like a bed, with ropes strung across it like a broken spiderweb. It was the ruin of a life. Someone, like her, had come here with hope. They had built these walls, dug that well, and dreamed of a future. They had failed. The silence in the room was the sound of their failure. Nantan gently led her to the rope bed and helped her sit. The ropes creaked, protesting. He went back outside and returned with his saddlebag and the water skin. He had a small tin cup. He poured the last of the water into it. It was perhaps 4 ounces. He gave it to her. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. He took his rifle and went back to the doorway. He did not build a fire. A fire would be a signal. He sat, cross-legged, a dark silhouette against the fading purple light, watching the way they had come. Night fell, and the desert, which had been an oven, became a cold plate. Sarah shivered, the shock setting in. The pain in her arm was a living thing, a deep, throbbing ache that consumed her. Nantan came inside. The darkness was total, but he moved with no hesitation. He unstrapped his bedroll, a thick roll of wool. He unfolded it and laid it over her. It was heavy, and it carried his scent, that strange, clean smell of sage. "You are not sleeping?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. "I will keep watch," he said. He returned to his post in the doorway. A long time passed. The silence was broken only by the skitter of some small night creature and the sigh of the wind through the empty window. Why, she finally asked. He did not turn. The trail is open. We left clear tracks. Tracks are a story. Anyone can read it. You are afraid, she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I am careful, he corrected her. His voice was a low rumble in the dark. Fear is a cloud. It blocks the sun. It makes a man blind. Caution is a stone. You can stand on it. I prefer the stone. She absorbed this. It was a different way of thinking. I was afraid of you, she admitted, the confession sounding loud in the small room. When I saw you, everything I was ever taught said you were. A killer, he finished for her. His voice was flat. She winced. Yes, I have killed, he said. I have also chosen not to. That is why I am here, and not with my people. This was a sliver of his story, offered with no explanation. It was more than she had expected. And you, he asked? His question surprised her. Why are you alone? My husband died 2 years ago. My father died last month. I am going to my aunt in Tucson. I did not want to be a burden, or a prize for some new husband. I wanted to be myself. Nantan was quiet for a long time. Considering this, to be yourself, that is a hard trail, for anyone. Another silence settled. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was not hostile. It was the shared quiet of two people who understood, from vastly different worlds, what it meant to be utterly alone. You helped me, she said, her voice hoarse. You did not have to. It is a great risk for you. Yes. Why? He looked out at the night. The stars were sharp, cold points of light. A million warnings. The desert was killing you. I chose not to help it. He had rescued her, but he had not claimed her. He had set her arm, given her his last water, and brought her to shade. He had not stolen her dignity. He had, in his own spare, hard way, preserved it. Sarah lay on the creaking ropes, covered by a stranger's blanket, her broken arm a heavy, throbbing weight. She watched his silhouette in the doorway, a guardian made of shadows. And under the pain, under the fear, a new feeling was surfacing. It was small. It was fragile. It was trust, a single, tentative seed, planted in the cold ashes of a dead dream. The night was a void, a cold, absolute black that pressed against the adobe walls. Sarah drifted in and out of a thin, painful sleep. The wool blanket Nantan had given her was heavy, but a chill had sunk deep into her bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the desert night. It radiated from the core of her, from the hot, heavy throb in her splinted arm. When the first weak, gray light of dawn touched the empty doorway, Nantan was already standing. He had not moved from his post, a sentinel carved from the shadows. He turned and looked at her. She tried to push herself up, to greet the day, to show him she was not a complete burden. A wave of dizziness, profound and sickening, washed over her. The single room tilted, the floor seeming to rush up at her. She fell back onto the creaking ropes, a low gasp escaping her. "Stay still," he commanded. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not ask permission. He put his hand against her forehead. His palm was calloused and dry, but it felt impossibly cool against her skin, which was burning. She shivered violently. "I am so cold." Nantan's face, which she had begun to read as a map of careful neutrality, tightened. He saw her eyes, too bright, the pupils small. He touched her neck, feeling the rapid, thready pulse. "The fall," he said, more to himself than to her. "The break. It has brought the fever." He turned and gathered his waterskin and his rifle. Sarah's heart seized in a new, sharp panic. "Where are you going?" "There is no water. The fever needs water. And it needs medicine. Or it will claim you. You are leaving me." The words were a child's plea. "I am coming back." He looked at her, his gaze holding hers, forcing her to see the truth of his words. "There is a spring in the rocks. I found it long ago, and there are plants. You will stay inside, away from the door. You will not move." He was gone. The square of light in the doorway was empty. She was alone, truly alone, in a way she had never been. She was unarmed, crippled, and now, she knew, sick. The silence of the adobe room was suddenly immense. It was the silence of a tomb. The sun, their enemy, began its slow climb. The gray light turned to yellow, the yellow to a harsh, blinding white. The patch of light on the floor of the room began to creep, a bright, hot stain. Sarah watched it, mesmerized. It was a predator, stalking her. The heat rose. The adobe walls, which had been cold, began to radiate warmth, but she was still cold. She shivered under the wool blanket, her teeth chattering. The pain in her arm was no longer a throb. It was a fire, a deep, consuming fire that was spreading up into her shoulder, down into her fingers. She closed her eyes. She was back in St. Louis. Her husband, Thomas, was sitting across from her at the polished mahogany table. He was reading the newspaper, his lips pursed in disapproval. "Sarah," he was saying, "a woman's place is to manage the home, not to fill her head with these notions. It is unseemly." Then the table was gone, and she was in her father's sick room. The air smelled of laudanum and old linens. Her father was breathing, a thin, rattling sound. "You must be strong. Sarah," he whispered, his hand a frail, paper-dry cage over hers. "You must be saved from the smallness of this life. Go west. Find your sky." Then the room dissolved, and there was only the sun. A hammer of light, and she was falling from the wagon again, the scream tearing from her throat. But this time, when she landed, Nantan was there. He knelt over her, his face a mask of shadow. "The desert does not lie," he said, his voice a rumble. He reached for her, and she tried to scream. She awoke with a jolt, her own cry echoing in the empty room. She was burning. The cold was gone, replaced by a suffocating dry heat that came from within. Her skin was tight, her lips cracked. Thirst was no longer a scratching at the back of her throat. It was an agonizing, all-consuming need. "Water," she whispered to the empty room. The sun was high. He had been gone for hours. He had not been coming back. The thought was a new, cold terror. He had helped her, yes, but he was a practical man. He had said it himself, the desert was honest. She was a liability. A sick white woman found in his care would mean his death. He had done what he could, and then he had saved himself. It was logical. It was the law of this place. She began to cry, but no tears came, only dry, racking sobs that shook her body and sent lances of pain up her arm. She was going to die here, in this ruin, a victim of her own foolish, romantic notions of independence. She slipped back into the fog. The world became a swirl of red dust and painful light. A shadow fell over her. She opened her eyes. He was back. Nantan stood in the doorway, a dark outline against the blinding white sun. He carried the water skin, which looked full, and in his other hand, he held a cluster of green, leafy plants and some strips of bark. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, placing the plants on the floor. He unstopped the water skin and lifted her head with one hand, pressing the mouth of the skin to her lips. "Drink," he said. The water was cool. It was not the warm, metallic water from her canteen. It was fresh, carrying the taste of rock and earth. It was the most beautiful thing she had in her life. She drank greedily, until he pulled the skin away. "Slowly," he said, "there is more." He set the water aside and turned to his work. He was all function, his movements economical and precise. He selected a few dark, fleshy leaves and put them in his mouth, chewing them. Sarah watched, her mind cloudy but fascinated. He was not behaving like the savages in the stories. He was not muttering chants or shaking a rattle. He was working with a quiet, focused competence. He was a doctor. He spat the chewed pulp into his hand, a dark, moist mash. He took his knife and carefully, so carefully, cut the bindings on her splint. The strips of her petticoat, stained and stiff, fell away. She looked at her arm. It was swollen, angry, the skin a taut, reddish purple, streaked with a frightening, darker line that tracked toward her elbow. Nantan looked at it, his face grim. He used his knife to gently lift the splints, which were already sticking to her skin. She hissed in pain. "I know," he said, his voice low. He did not stop. He laid the poultice of chewed leaves directly onto the broken, infected skin. It stung, a sharp, clean burn that was almost a relief from the deep, dull ache. Then he took other leaves, broader and drier, and laid them over the poultice. He used fresh strips of cloth, torn from his own shirt, to rebind the splints. He worked quickly, his hands sure, the knot secure. Next, he took the strips of bark and a small, bitter-looking root. He used the butt of his knife to crush them on a flat stone he had brought in. He mixed the powder with a tiny bit of water in the tin cup, creating a thick, dark liquid. "You will drink this," he said. He lifted her head again. She smelled it first, a scent like bitter almonds and burned wood. She turned her head away. "No." "It will fight the fever," he said. He was not asking. His hand was firm on her jaw, his thumb pressing her cheek in a way that forced her mouth to open slightly. He poured the bitter draught in. She gagged, but she swallowed. It was vile. It burned all the way down. He laid her back. He took another strip of cloth, soaked it in the cool water from the skin, and laid it across her forehead. He sat back on his heels. "Now, we wait." He did not return to the door. He sat against the wall, near the rope bed, where he could watch her. The day crawled by. The fever raged. Sarah was lost, adrift on a hot, dark sea. She was dimly aware of him. He was a constant presence. He changed the cloth on her head. He forced more water, and later, more of the bitter medicine, down her throat. She talked. She did not know it, but she talked. She spoke to her father. She argued with Thomas. She wept for her lost mules. Through it all, Nantan sat and listened. He watched the shadows move. He watched the rise and fall of her chest. He was a man of infinite patience. He was guarding her, not just from the dangers outside, but from the fire within. The sun set, the room filled with purple shadows. The desert chill returned. But this time, the heat was her own. Night came. She thrashed, crying out as a vision of the broken wagon tilting over her filled her mind. "You are safe," his voice cut through the nightmare. His hand was on her good shoulder, holding her down, a solid, living anchor in her swirling chaos. "You are in the house of earth. You are safe." His words, spoken in his measured, rhythmic English, became a lifeline. She clung to them. She did not know when the fever broke. It was not a sudden thing. It was like a tide turning, a slow, pulling retreat. The intense, burning heat recedes, giving way to a simple, profound weariness and sweat. She was drenched. The wool blanket was damp. She opened her eyes. The room was filled with the soft, gray light of a second dawn. The air was cool and clean. Her mind, for the first time in what felt like days, was clear. It was empty and weak, but it was hers. She turned her head. Nantan was not in the doorway. He was slumped against the wall beside her bed, his head resting on his knees, his rifle lying across his lap. He was asleep. He was not the stoic, tireless warrior. He was a man. His face, in the unforgiving light, was etched with a profound exhaustion. His eyes were closed, his black eyelashes stark against his skin. There were dark, bruised-looking shadows beneath his eyes. His breathing was deep, slow. He had not slept, Not in 2 days. He had stood guard. He had found water. He had gathered medicine. He had nursed her. A wave of feeling, so powerful it almost made her dizzy again, washed over her. It was not just gratitude. Gratitude was a debt, a weight. This was something else. It was recognition. She was seeing him. The man, not the Apache, not the savior, but the man, in his exhaustion, in his sacrifice. She moved, a small rustle of the blanket. Instantly, he was awake. His head snapped up, his hand gripping his rifle, his eyes, which were indeed red-rimmed and weary, focused on her. He saw her. He saw the clarity in her gaze. He visibly relaxed, the tension leaving his shoulders. "The fever is broken," he said. His voice was rough from lack of sleep. "You stayed," she whispered. He nodded, pushing himself into a sitting position, his back straight against the adobe. "I said I would." The water, she looked at the water skin. It was hanging from a peg by the fireplace, and it was still half full. The spring is safe, hidden. She lay there, looking at him. "You told me you were cast out, for choosing not to kill." He looked at his hands, which were resting on his knees. "Yes, my Shichi, my father's people. They follow the old ways, the war ways. They believe the white eyes have taken everything, and the only answer is to take back, to make them feel fear. So they raided. They planned to... a small homestead, a woman, her children. The man was gone. They called it justice. I called it murder." His voice was low, bitter. "They said I had a white heart, that I was weak. They said I was no longer Apache." "You were exiled," Sarah said, "for being a good man." He looked at her, his gaze sharp, almost angry. "I was not being good. I was being myself. I will not kill the helpless. I will not kill for sport or for a message. I will kill to protect. That is my law." Sarah absorbed this. It was a stark, hard code, born of this land. But it was a code. It was more than many men in her own world possessed. "In my world," she said, her voice quiet, "I was always told I needed saving, that I was weak. My husband, he wanted to protect me from my own thoughts. After he died, my father's friends wanted to protect my inheritance by marrying me. They all wanted to save me, but it felt like being put in a box." She looked at her splinted arm, at the dark, herbal stain peeking through the clean cloth. "You did not save me. You helped me. You set my arm. You gave me medicine, but you always told me the choice was mine." "The choice is all we have," he said. He stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. He was still wary, still the guard. He moved to the doorway, his body instinctively seeking the position of watchfulness. He froze. He did not turn, but his whole body went utterly still. "What is it?" Sarah asked, trying to sit up. "Do not move." His voice was a low hiss. He sank into a crouch, his eyes scanning not the valley floor, but the high, sharp rim of the mesa to the north. "What do you see?" "Nothing," he said. "That is what is wrong." He pointed. "The hawk! See!" She followed his gaze. A hawk was circling high above. "It is just a bird." "It is a hunter. It always hunts the valley floor. It is hunting the ridge. Something disturbed it, something on the ground." He was silent for a long, tense minute. The room was so quiet she could hear the blood pounding in her own ears. "When I went for water," he said, his voice barely audible. "Yesterday, I saw them. Tracks." "What tracks?" "Horses. 3 of them. Shod horses, ridden by white men. They came up the trail we used. They stopped, up there, on the ridge. They looked down here, into this place." A cold dread, worse than the fever, gripped Sarah. "They saw you. They saw the house. They saw a place to look, but they did not come down. They rode on. Why?" "Maybe they were just passing." "No," Nantan said. He pressed his back against the adobe wall, his rifle ready. Men like that, in this land, they are not just passing. They are coyotes. They circle, they watch, they wait for you to be weak. The invisible threat was suddenly real. It had a name. It was the law. It was men like Abel Crow. It was the world she had come from. Hunting her. "It is me," she whispered, horrified. "They are tracking me, or they are tracking you, and they will find you with me." "Yes," he said, the simple fact hung in the air. "You must go," she said, her voice gaining a frantic strength. "Now, while it is light, you can slip away. I will tell them you captured me. I will tell them you ran. They will believe me." Nantan looked at her. He looked at her pale, sweat-soaked face. He looked at her splinted arm. He knew what would happen to a lone, sick woman found here. "And you?" he asked. "What will you tell them when they find you alone, with a warrior's medicine on your arm?" She had no answer. The stakes were clear. If he stayed, they would both be caught. He would be hanged. She would be rescued. The word tasted like ash. If he left, he was free, and she was left to whatever fate the desert, or those men, chose for her. She saw the exhaustion still clinging to him. She saw the patience in his eyes as he had nursed her. She saw the man who had been cast out for his own code. Her gratitude was a powerful, aching thing, but what rose up beside it was something stronger. It was choice. "If you stay," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "I am staying too. Not as your burden, but as your partner. I am choosing this. I will not be the reason you are caught. I will not be a victim." He looked at her for a long time. He was seeing the woman who had crossed the plains alone, the woman who had chosen the desert over the cage. He was seeing a strength he recognized. He turned from the door and came back to the center of the room. He picked up the water skin. He held it out to her. She took it with her good hand and drank. The water was cool. A promise. "If we stay," Nantan said, "we are no longer just hiding from the fever. We are facing the men." "If we run," she asked. "We run forever. They will hunt us. Here." He gestured to the solid earth walls. "We have shelter. We have water. We have time to let your arm heal, to let you grow strong." He made the decision. We stay, we heal, and when we leave our way, not as prey. He took the water skin from her, and this time he drank. It was a shared resource, a pact. They were in this house of ruins, together. The pact hung in the small, dusty room. It was a tangible thing, as real as the adobe walls, as heavy as the splint on Sarah's arm. They had agreed to stay. They had agreed to face what was coming, together. But the air was thick with the unsaid, with the true, terrible cost of that decision. Nantan moved away from the door. His ceaseless watch had ended, replaced by a new, more intense energy. He was no longer just a guard. He was a planner. He checked the last of the bitter medicine he had made, his face grim. It was almost gone. He checked the water skin. It was 2/3 full. "Your fever is gone," he said, his voice low. "But the weakness stays. The arm must have time. The bone is knitting, but it is new. It is fragile." Sarah had pushed herself up to sit on the edge of the rope bed, her feet dangling. The simple act left her breathless, a fine sheen of sweat on her forehead. But her mind was sharp. "How long?" she asked. 7 days, he said, "maybe 10. We need you strong. The ride to the border of New Mexico is hard. We must be able to move fast, and to move without stopping." He turned to face her. The gray morning light was kind to neither of them. It showed the weariness in his bones, the deep, red-rimmed exhaustion in his eyes. It showed her pallor, the way her dress hung on her slighter frame, the dark circles under her eyes. "You said you choose this." He said it was not a question. It was a statement he was testing, weighing. "Yes," she said. "You do not know what you choose." His voice was not angry. It was quiet, freighted with a truth she had never had to live. You are a white woman. In your world, you are a prize. You are a thing to be protected, to be sheltered. The law is made for you. The law was made to put me in a box, she countered, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength. It was made to tell me what I could and could not do, who I could and could not be. That law, he continued, ignoring her, will look at me, and it will see one thing: an animal, a savage who has taken you. They will not ask you what you choose. Your choice will not matter to them. It will be a story they tell themselves, that you were crazed with fear, that you were forced. He was afraid. She realized it with a jolt. This strong, capable man, who had faced the desert and his own people, was afraid. Not of the men coming, but of what they would do to her. They will call you unclean, he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. They will rescue you, and you will be ruined. You will have no name. You will have no place. They will hang me. That is the easy part. But they will destroy you. That is what you are choosing. She looked at her hands, her good one resting on the rough wool of his blanket. He had saved her life, not as an act of possession, but as an act of principle. He had shared his water, his medicine, his protection, and in return, she was bringing the world he had tried to escape, the world that hunted him, right to his door. I am grateful, she began, but he cut her off. I do not want your gratitude. Gratitude is a chain. I want you to see the truth. I am a man with no people. I have no world to offer you. I do not want a world, Sarah said, and she looked up, her gaze meeting his. The fog of her sickness was gone, and in its place was a startling, hard-won clarity. I am not staying because I am grateful. I am staying because this being here, it is the first honest thing that has happened to me. You have not lied to me. You did not lie about the wagon. You did not lie about the desert. You do not lie about the men who are coming. In St. Louis, my life was built on lies, polite lies, what a woman should be, what a widow must do. It was a slow suffocation. She took a breath. I choose this. I choose you, not as a savior, but as a partner. You said you have your own law. I am choosing yours. I will not be the cause of your death. Nantan, if we are to be caught, we will be caught together. If we are to run, we will run together. I will not be your victim, and I will not be your burden. He stared at her for a long time. He was seeing beyond the pale skin and the fine, worn dress. He was seeing the woman who had set out alone to find her own piece of sky. He was seeing a spine as strong as his own. He gave a single, short nod. The discussion was over. The choice was made. The responsibility was now shared. Then we plan. He said, 7 days. I will hunt. Small things. Snares. My rifle is too loud. It is a sign to those who are listening. I will bring water. You will rest. You will walk. You will eat. You will mend. That is your work. And then she asked, then we ride east to New Mexico. There is a town, Willow Creek. It is not a good place. It is a town of miners and freighters and men who have forgotten their names. They care for gold and for whiskey and for staying alive. They are practical. They do not look too closely at a man and a woman who keep to themselves, who pay in coin, and who do not cause trouble. It is a place to be lost in. It is a place to start. It was the barest sliver of a plan, but it was more than she had had since the axle broke. It was a direction. Far away from the quiet valley, Abel Crow was finding his own direction. He sat in the telegraph office at Maricopa Wells, the air thick with the smell of hot metal and stale tobacco. The telegraph key clicked and chattered, a mechanical serpent spitting out news from the wider world. Crow was not interested in the wider world. He was interested in this world, his territory. He was reading a report from an army patrol. It was dry, full of procedural language, but it mentioned a string of robberies. A gang called the Mesa Dogs. Disorganized, brutal, they had hit a supply wagon and a mining camp. Crow's thin lips pressed into a line. This was the kind of filth he lived to scour. This was the chaos that he, as an instrument of the law, was meant to put down. He saw them as a symptom of the land's sickness, its moral decay. He would make his name bringing them to justice. A man sidled up to him, a grubby prospector with a nervous tick in one eye. He smelled of sweat and desperation. "Marshal," he whined, holding his hat in his hands. "Marshal Crow." Crow looked at him, his pale eyes cold. "What is it?" "I seen something. Thought you ought to know. I was checking my traps up near the Hasayampa headwaters. In that valley, the one they call the Dead Ranch." Crow's attention sharpened. "Go on." "Tracks," the man said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "2 horses. One was shod. American horse, but the other bare hoof. An Apache pony. Marshal. No doubt, they was traveling together, headed right for the old adobe." Crow's face remained a mask, but his mind was alight. An Apache, together. This was the deeper sickness. "And I found this," the man said. Digging in his pocket, he pulled out a small, crumpled piece of cloth. It was white, fine cotton, and dirty, but the quality was unmistakable. It was not the rough canvas of a prospector or a soldier. It was woman's cloth. From a petticoat. Crow looked at the cloth. He did not touch it. An Apache warrior. A white woman. In his mind, the 2 crimes merged. The violent, chaotic Mesa Dogs and this quiet, unnatural pairing were one and the same. They were both a defiance of the line. They were both unclean. "You saw no one?" Crow asked. "No, sir. I didn't go down. I ain't foolish. I saw the tracks. I found the cloth. And I came straight here." "You did well," Crow said. He reached into his vest and pulled out a $1 coin. The prospector's eyes widened. "You will tell no one else. You will not go back there. This is my business now." "Yes, Marshal. Thank you. Marshal." The man scurried away. Crow stood for a moment. He had 2 targets. The Mesa Dogs were the public threat, the one he could use to build his reputation, to show the territory he was its righteous guardian. The couple in the valley that was a private matter, a personal offense against his God and his order. He would be methodical. He would hunt the dogs first. He would use them as bait. Let them get louder, draw them out. He would crush them with the full, public force of the law. And then, with that victory secured, he would ride to the Dead Ranch. He would ride there in silence, and he would cleanse that valley himself. He decided to send a scout, the quietest man he knew, to watch the valley from the ridge, to wait, to let the sin ripen. The days in the adobe ranch house fell into a new rhythm. It was a rhythm of survival, of shared purpose. Nantan would leave before dawn, a silent shadow slipping out to check his snares and refill the water skin at the hidden spring. He returned with the rising sun, bringing a brace of rabbits, or a handful of plump quail. Sarah's work was to heal. She did as he said. She ate the tough, smoky meat he cooked over a small, nearly smokeless fire of dry mesquite. She drank the water. She walked, at first just from the bed to the door, then all the way to the dry well and back. Her strength returned in small, precious increments. The fever was gone. The angry red lines on her arm had faded. The swelling was down. She could feel the bone, a hard, rigid line beneath her skin, and it felt strong. She spent hours sitting on the rope bed. It had been the symbol of her collapse, the place of her fevered nightmares. Now, it was her hearth, her chair, her world. The ropes were old, brittle. One of them had snapped under her weight. With her good hand, she began to fix it. She found a coil of old rope in the corner, stiff but usable. She spent an afternoon, her brow furrowed in concentration, her good hand aching, weaving the new rope through the frame, pulling it taut. securing it with a knot she had to invent. Nantan returned as the sun was setting, filling the room with orange light. He stopped in the doorway, watching her. She was tying off the knot, her teeth gritted with the effort. She finished and looked up, her face smudged with dirt. "It is not a good knot, but it is strong. It will hold." He came inside and put the rabbits down. He walked to the bed. He pressed his hand down on the new rope. It was tight. It sang with a low, thrumming note. "It will hold," he agreed. They were mending the house. They were mending themselves. The taut ropes were their new reality. A life of shared discipline, of making do, of holding on. That night, they sat by the small fire. The desert cold was sharp, but the small flames, and their shared presence, kept the worst of it at bay. "You make no sound," she said, watching him skin a rabbit with economical, precise cuts. "In the morning, you are just gone. When you walk, the floor does not creak." He continued his work. "The ground speaks. You must learn to walk without waking it. Sound is a warning. It tells the prey you are coming. It tells the hunter where you are." "You said you would kill to protect," she remembered, her voice soft. "But you hunt with snares. You live so quietly. You seem to hate the violence." He paused, his knife still. He looked at the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the small flames. "To kill is a failure," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It is the end of all choices. A man who kills for pride or for pleasure. He is a broken man. He is a child throwing stones. Sometimes it must be done, to stop a worse thing, to protect a life." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "But it is not strength. Your people, the white men, they think strength is a loud noise, a cannon, a train, a loud voice giving orders. They think it is in breaking things, in taming the land, in breaking the horse, in breaking other men." He shook his head. A slow, sad movement. "They are wrong. Strength is to hold the hand back. Strength is to see the other path. Strength is patience. It is to build, not to break, to endure, to choose not to break." Sarah listened, and she understood. This was his code. This was the my way he lived by. It was not a law of rebellion. It was a law of profound, personal discipline. It was the creed of a man who had chosen not to kill, and in doing so, had been forced to find a harder, quieter way to live. The week was almost over. Her arm was healing. She could use her fingers, could hold a cup. She felt the strength returning to her legs. They were a team. They spoke little, but they moved around each other with a new, shared understanding. But the tension was a wire pulled as taut as the new rope on the bed. Nantan still spent hours watching the ridge line. The hawk was still there, and sometimes, just at dusk, they would both see it a tiny glint of light, high on the mesa, where the sun caught the lens of a spyglass. They were not alone. The world was watching, and it was waiting. The 10th day dawned cold and sharp, the watcher on the ridge, the tiny, hateful glint of sun on glass, had been gone for 2 days. Nantan did not trust its absence. "He is not gone," he said, his voice a low rumble in the pre-dawn dark. "He is waiting, or he has gone to get others." "Today, then," Sarah said. It was not a question. She stood by the doorway, no longer the pale invalid who had collapsed here. Her fever was a distant memory. Her arm, still bound in its splints, was a dull, manageable ache, but she had full use of her fingers. She had spent the last 3 days braiding horsehair and thin strips of hide into a new, stronger rope for their bedroll and supplies. Her body was thin, yes, but the sun and the lean meat had hardened her. The St. Louis widow was a ghost, her fine, soft edges burned away by the desert. Nantan had prepared. He had snared 2 more rabbits and cooked them, the meat packed with the last of his dried herbs. The water skins, both his and the one salvaged from her wagon, were full. He had spent a day meticulously scraping and patching her old canteen. He had sacrificed the last of his wool blanket, tearing it into strips to muffle the hooves of his paint horse. "We do not walk out," he said. "We disappear." He led the horse, its feet now silent as a cat's, not out the doorway, but through the collapsed rear wall of the adobe, into the deep, winding arroyo that cut behind the ranch. It was a scar in the earth, a dry riverbed shadowed by sheer, crumbling walls of red dirt. It was their escape. He lifted her onto the horse's bare back, then swung up behind her, his body a familiar, solid wall against her back. He did not take the rope bridle. He held his rifle, his gaze fixed on the high ridges above them. He guided the horse with the pressure of his knees. The arroyo snaked for miles, a secret, hidden path. It protected them from the wind. It protected them from the sun. Most of all, it protected them from the watcher. They moved in silence. The only sound, the soft thud of the muffled hooves on sand. Sarah felt her world shrink to the width of the canyon walls. This was Nantan's world. It was a world not of open roads and signposts, but of hidden ways, of reading the subtle language of the earth. As they rode, he began to teach her. His voice was quiet, his words sparse. "See," he whispered, pointing to a cluster of stones. "They are too neat. A man put them there, to wait, a long time ago." Later, he pointed to the bank. "The brush is bent, not by wind, by a body, a deer, moving through. He follows the water you cannot see." He was teaching her to see the world as he did, as a story to be read. He was not just giving her passage. He was giving her the tools to survive. The land, which had been her enemy, the vast, uncaring thing that had tried to kill her, was becoming something else. It was becoming a shelter. It was threatening, but it was also supporting them, offering them a path, if only they were smart enough and quiet enough to take it. They rode for 3 days. They avoided all trails, all signs of men. They crossed the open, dangerous places only at night, under a sliver of moon. By day, they rested in rock crevices or under the sparse shade of a palo verde tree. The world was a mosaic of small, hard encounters. Once, from a high ridge, they looked down on a small mining camp. 3 men, small as ants, worked a sluice box. Their voices, loud and rough, drifted up on the hot air. They were a patch of noise and chaos in the vast silence. Nantan simply watched them for a long time, his face unreadable, before turning the horse away, adding 5 miles to their journey to give the camp a wide berth. Another time, hiding in a cluster of boulders as evening fell. They watched a long freight wagon pulled by a team of 20 mules grown past on a distant trail. Sarah saw the armed outriders, their rifles held ready. This was the world she had tried to enter, a world of commerce and danger, and it seemed utterly alien to her now. On the 5th day, Sarah saw the nest. They were resting in the shadow of a high, sheer cliff. She looked up, tracing a crack in the red rock, and saw it, a small, perfect cup of mud and twigs, glued to the stone face, 100 feet above the ground. As she watched, a small bird, a swallow, arrowed into it, and she heard the faint, impossibly hopeful sound of peeping. She touched Nantan's arm and pointed. He looked, his face, usually so composed, softened almost imperceptibly. He nodded. "Life," he said. "Just that one word." A home, built on the edge of a void, made of nothing but mud and spit and patience. It was a promise. It was a symbol of his way to endure, to build in the hard places, to hold on. On the 6th day, they came to the San Pedro River. It was not a mighty river, but it was wide and shallow, and it was water. They had been rationing for 2 days, and the sight of it made Sarah almost weep with relief. But Nantan held up a hand, stopping the horse in a thicket of willows. 2 men were downstream, watering their horses. They were cowboys. By their hats and chaps, they were also drunk. Sarah could smell the sour mash of whiskey on the air even from 50 yards away. They were laughing, loud, braying laughs that shattered the river's peace. They spotted them. "Well, looky here," one of them shouted. A thick-set man with a sun-boiled face. He nudged his partner. "Look what the river washed up." Jeb, the one called Jeb, thinner and meaner, grinned, showing broken teeth. It's an Apache buck, and he's got himself a prize. They urged their horses forward, splashing through the shallow water, to block the crossing. Their hands were on their hips, near their pistols. "That's a mighty fine-looking woman you got there." "Injun," the thick-set one said, his eyes crawling over Sarah. "She looks parched. We was just about to offer her a real drink from our flask." Sarah's blood went cold. This was the moment. This was the nightmare every story had promised. She looked at Nantan, expecting him to reach for his rifle, expecting the explosion of violence she had been taught was his only language. Nantan did nothing. He did not reach for his gun. He did not pull his knife. He did not even tense. He simply sat on his horse, his body in a state of perfect, patient stillness. He held the rope bridle in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. He placed his horse, almost casually, a half step in front of Sarah's body, shielding her. He looked at the two men. He did not scowl. He did not threaten. He just looked. His gaze was flat, impersonal, as if he were measuring a distance or studying a rock. "We are passing," he said. His voice was low and calm, but it carried, cutting straight through their drunken haze. "We want no trouble." "Trouble's what you found." "Boy," Jeb snarled, his hand moving to his pistol grip. "A redskin ain't allowed to travel with a white woman. That's the law. Now you back away slow, and we'll take the lady into town. We'll keep her safe." Nantan did not move. He did not even blink. He continued to look at Jeb, his silence a sudden, heavy weight. The air, which had been full of noise, went quiet. The river gurgled. The wind rustled the willows. In that quiet, Nantan's stillness became a presence. It was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of the mountain, of the stone. It was the absolute certainty of a man who had made his calculations and was not afraid of the result. He was not a victim. He was a rock. And the drunk, angry men were a wave that was about to break against him. Jeb's hand tightened on his gun, but he hesitated. He had expected fear, or rage. He had expected a savage to act like a savage. He did not know what to do with this calm. He saw Nantan's eyes. They were not angry. They were not scared. They were just waiting. The thick-set man looked from Nantan to his partner, and his drunken bluster began to fade. He saw no fear in the Apache's face. He saw no weakness. He saw a man who had already decided what would happen. This was not a fight they would win easily, if they won it at all. "Oh, hell. Jeb," the thick-set one muttered, pulling at his own reins. "Leave it. She ain't worth a bullet. Let's get that drink." Jeb spat into the river. He wanted to push. He wanted the violence. But he was alone, and the Apache's unblinking stare was unnerving him, sobering him. "This ain't over," Jeb threatened, but his voice had lost its edge. He pulled his horse's head around, and the two of them splashed back across the river, disappearing into the cottonwoods. Nantan did not move until the sound of their horses had faded completely. Sarah was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. Her breath was coming in short, painful gasps. "You did nothing." He had his hand on his gun. Nantan finally turned his head. He looked at her. "I did everything," he said quietly. "I did not give him a target. A man who draws a gun is afraid. He is shouting to the world that he has lost control, and he must make a loud noise to get it back. I held the line. I showed him I was not afraid. I showed him the cost. He chose to live." He nudged the horse forward into the river. A shot would bring others. A fight would leave a mark. It would tell our story. This was just wind. It is gone. My way is to save our strength, not to spend it on fools. They filled the waterskins and crossed the river, moving back into the high, dry country. They were heading for the New Mexico border, for the town of Willow Creek. The land grew harder, a vast, broken table of rock and scrub. They came to a fork in a high, desolate pass. Nantan stopped. He pointed with his chin. That is the way. The quick way. It is called Dog Canyon. It is the main trail to Willow Creek. But you do not want to take it, Sarah said. She was learning to read his silences. It is a box, he said. High walls. Easy to watch, easy to trap. It is the pass the Mesa dogs use to raid the freight lines. It is the pass a hunter would watch. He pointed to the other trail, a thin, winding track that went straight up into the waterless Badlands. That way is high. It is slow. We will have no cover, but we will see for miles. No one can hide. No one can trap us. The dilemma, Sarah murmured. The fast way. We risk the Mesa dogs, or the Watcher. The slow way. We risk the desert. We risk thirst. Nantan looked at the waterskins. They were full, but the high trail would take 3 days. It would not be enough. Sarah looked at the high, hard trail. Then she looked at Nantan. You said strength is patience, to endure. The fast way, that is the loud noise. That is the way of the men with guns. It is a gamble. A flicker of something pride. Respect warmed his eyes. Yes. We take the high trail, she said, her voice firm. She was no longer asking. She was choosing. He looked at her, and he nodded. There is a place, he said, a hidden spring, one I found long ago, when I was a boy. It is not on any map. It is far off the trail. It will add a day. But it is safe. It is water no one else knows. Slow, but safe, she said. It is the way, he agreed. He turned the horse toward the high Badlands. At that same moment, 100 miles away, Abel Crow stood over the body of a man named Silas Green. Green was a merchant, and he was lying face down in the dust next to his overturned wagon, his back full of arrows. Mesa dogs, his deputy asked. Crow nudged the body with his boot. He saw the shod horse tracks, the chaos of the raid, but he also saw something else. The arrows. They were not typical Apache fletching. They were crude, made to look like Apache arrows. This is them, Crow said. His scout, the one from the ridge. Rode up. Marshal, they came out, the Apache and the woman. They're moving east, heading for the high pass, toward Willow Creek. They're 2, maybe 3 days ahead. Crow looked at the dead merchant. He looked at the fake arrows. He looked east, toward Willow Creek. A cold, righteous plan formed in his mind. The Mesa dogs were in the pass. The Apache was heading for the same territory. He could solve all of it. He could cleanse the territory of all its filth, all at once. The Apache, Crow said, his voice flat and hard, is working with them. He killed this man. He stole that woman. He is leading the Mesa dogs. The deputy's eyes went wide. Marshal, are you? I am sure, Crow said, cutting him off. I am the law. I am the one who sees the line. And he has crossed it. He turned to his men. We are not riding to the pass. We are riding to Willow Creek. We will be there first. We will tell the good people of that town what is coming. And when that murdering savage and his stolen woman ride in, the town will be ready to serve the law. The high, hard trail was an anvil, and the sun was the hammer. For 3 days, they had followed the path Nantan had chosen, a winding, upward scar across the Badlands. It was a path of patience, of endurance, and it was brutal. They were exposed. The sun was a physical weight, pressing down from a sky that had been bleached white. There was no shade, only the shimmering, wavering heat that rose from the rocks. Sarah felt it. She felt it in the dry, cracked skin of her lips, in the grit that coated her face and filled her lungs. She felt it in the jolt of the horse's walk, a relentless rhythm that sent a low, sharp ache up her mended arm. She had been strong. She had pushed through the weakness, through the memory of the fever, but the land was indifferent to her strength. It demanded more. On the fourth day, the shivering began. It was a small, uncontrollable tremor in her good hand. She tried to hide it, clenching her fist in the horse's mane, but Nantan felt it. He was a living extension of her, his body a solid wall at her back. He felt the fine, violent shudder pass through her. He did not stop. He did not speak. He just nudged the horse forward, his eyes scanning the horizon, his face a mask of stone. He was searching. That evening, they found it, the hidden spring. It was not a pool, but a dark, wet stain on a rock face, hidden in a cleft of granite. Water, impossibly cool and sweet, wept from the stone, gathering in a small, fist-sized basin. It took an hour to fill the water skins. When Nantan brought the full skin to her, she was sitting on the ground, wrapped in his wool blanket, her body shaking in the 100-degree heat. The fever was back. It had not been defeated. It had only been waiting. The journey, the relentless sun, the hard ride, had called it forth again. Nantan looked at her, his dark eyes missing nothing. He saw the unnatural brightness of her gaze, the blue tint to her lips. He saw the way she cradled her splinted arm, as if the bone itself were on fire. This was a new, more dangerous enemy. He had herbs for the fever, but they were back at the first ranch, a lifetime away. Here, he had only water, and water would not be enough. He made the calculation. To stay here, by the spring, was impossible. They were exposed on all sides. The men who hunted them, the men who had been watching, would find this place. To ride on, to push for Willow Creek, was to kill her. The ride would shake the life from her. He needed shelter. He needed walls. He looked north. There was a place. He had seen it on his own, long ago. A line shack, built by some hopeful, and then abandoned. It was a risk. A structure was a trap. It was the first place a hunter would look. But the fever was here. Now. The hunters were a maybe. "There is a house," he said, his voice low. "Of wood. It is near." He lifted her onto the horse. She was almost weightless. A bundle of cloth and shivering bone. She sagged against him, her head falling back against his shoulder. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her, his arm a steel band around her waist, holding her to him. It was 2 miles of hell. Sarah drifted, lost in a new fog. She was burning and freezing, the world a painful, shimmering blur. She felt the horse stop. She felt Nantan's arm slide under her, lifting her down. She was on the ground, her legs collapsing. "I cannot," she whispered, the words a dry rasp. "Nantan, you must go. Leave me. I am finished." "Be still," he commanded. His voice was not harsh, but it was absolute. It was the voice of a man who would not be argued with. He bent, and with one smooth, powerful motion, he lifted her. He did not lift her as a bride. He did not lift her as a delicate burden. He lifted her as a warrior, as a man with a purpose, his arms locking under her knees and around her back. He carried her through the broken doorway of the small shack. It was one room, smelling of dry rot, pack rats, and old despair. In the corner, a rusted potbelly stove. Against the far wall, a wooden frame with sagging rope springs. He crossed the room and laid her on the bed. The ropes groaned. The dust rose in a cloud. This was the moment, the title. The warrior Apache threw her on his bed. But it was not an act of passion. It was not an act of violence. It was an act of pure, desperate, disciplined care. She thrashed, her head turning on the dusty ropes. "No, no, you must. They will find you. They will find us. It is my fault." He put his hand on her shoulder, not gently, but firmly, holding her still. His face was close to hers, his dark eyes boring into her fevered ones. "Now," he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through her delirium. "Now we do this my way. She went still, her eyes wide, locked on his. "My way is not to run," he said. "My way is not to panic. My way is not to let the fever, or the men, or the fear make our choices. We make them. Here, the fever is the enemy in this room. We will fight it. We heal first. We find our strength. Then we plan the next step. We will not be hurried. We will not be hunted. Do you understand?" She stared at him, the strength of his will pulling her back from the edge. She saw the man who had faced down the drunkards at the river, the man who had been cast out for his own law. She gave a single jerky nod. "Good," he said. He stood up. "Your work is to rest. My work is to guard you." He went to the spring and brought back water. He tore a strip from what was left of his blanket, soaked it, and laid it on her forehead. The fever was raging. She was burning, but she was shivering, the cold coming from deep in her bones. He worked all afternoon, bathing her face, forcing sips of water. The sun began to set, painting the small, dusty room in shades of blood. The desert night, with its plunging, immediate cold, crept in. Sarah began to shake violently. Her teeth chattered, a sound like rattling bones. The blanket was not enough. Nantan looked at the dying light. He looked at the shivering woman on the bed. He had a choice. He could build a fire, but a fire was a beacon. It was a shouted invitation to any man within 10 miles, or he could let her freeze. He chose the third path. He sat on the edge of the bed. It creaked under his weight. Sarah flinched, her eyes flying open, a new, older fear in them. "You are cold," he stated. "I am not. I will be your fire." He did not ask permission. He was following his own law. He slid onto the narrow bed, behind her, and pulled the heavy wool blanket over them both. He lay on his side, his body a long, solid line of warmth, and gathered her back against his chest. Sarah went rigid. This was more intimate than any touch they had shared. She could feel the hard muscles of his chest, the steady, slow beat of his heart against her shoulders. She could feel his breath, warm and even, on her hair. But there was no threat in his arms. He held her as he had held her on the horse, a grip that was supportive, not possessive. His body was a shield against the cold, a living, breathing fortress. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, her muscles unclamped. The violent bone-rattling shivers began to subside, replaced by a deep, steady warmth. It was life. It was comfort. It was a profound, unspoken statement of trust. She let out a breath she had been holding for a lifetime. She was safe. In the arms of a man she had been taught to fear, she was safer than she had ever been in her life. "Sleep," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against her back. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested, and she healed. Nantan did not sleep. He lay still, his body giving warmth to the woman in his arms. But his every sense was straining into the blackness. He held his knife in the hand that was not holding her. He listened. He listened to her breathing as it evened out, the fevered, shallow gasps softening. He listened to the night, and the night, near dawn, answered. He heard it, a single soft clink, metal on stone, a shod horse, walking with care, but not with enough. He slid from the bed, a movement of pure smoke. Sarah did not even stir. He picked up his rifle and was at the window, a sliver of an opening. In an instant, he saw them. 3 riders, silhouetted against the graying eastern sky. They were on the ridge, looking down, even from here. Nantan recognized the rigid, self-righteous posture of the man in the lead, the watcher, and he had brought his pack. The men did not ride down. They were smart, or their leader was. They split up, fanning out. They were making a circle. They were laying a siege. Nantan watched, his mind a cold, clear engine. They were trapped. Sarah was sick. They had 1 horse, 3 men, armed. A direct fight was an execution. Running was impossible. His law, My way is not to panic. My way is to think. He pulled back from the window. He moved through the small, dark room, his hands assessing his resources. He found it in the trash pile in the corner. An empty tin, perhaps for peaches or beans. He found a spool of thin, rotted thread in a collapsed wooden box. He went to the door. With his knife, he delicately, patiently, rigged the thread across the doorway, low to the ground. He balanced the tin on the door jamb with a small pebble inside. If the thread was touched, the tin would fall. He did the same at the window. It was a crude alarm, but it would speak before a rifle could. He crouched beside the wall, a place of shadow, between the door and the window. He was a man made of patience. He was a healer, and he was a warrior. He was waiting. The sun came up. The heat returned. The shack became a stifling, breathless oven. Sarah woke. Her eyes were clear. The fever had burned low in the night. Fought back by his warmth. She saw him. He was not beside her. He was a statue of coiled tension against the wall, his rifle across his knees. She saw his face. "They are here," she whispered. "Yes." His voice was flat. "3 of them. They are watching. They have been there since dawn. They wait for us to move. Or for night." Sarah pushed herself up. She was weak, her body aching, but her mind was sharp. Her eyes darted around the room. The men outside, the coming night, this room as a trap. She looked at the small, pot-bellied stove. Then she looked at the crumbling stone fireplace on the other wall. And she saw it. "Nantan," she whispered, her voice urgent. He was at her side in an instant. She pointed. "Behind the fireplace. There is an opening, a drain, for the storms. When I was ill, I saw the light through it. It must lead out, to the arroyo on the east." Nantan went to the fireplace. He knelt behind the soot and the rubble. There was a low, black hole, barely 2 feet wide, lined with stone. It was a culvert, to keep the flash floods from destroying the shack's foundation. He put his head near it. He could feel a faint, cool draft. It was a way out. "It is a good plan," he said. "No," Sarah said, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. "It is half a plan. They are watching the door. They are watching the window. They will be watching the arroyo. If we just run, they will see us." "They are waiting for dark," Nantan said. "They will try to come in. The bells will warn us." "We cannot wait for them," Sarah said, her voice gaining a thin, fierce strength. "We must choose your way. We make the choice, not them." She looked at him. "There is a shed. I saw it when you carried me in. A small outbuilding. Wood. Dry as bone." He saw her thought. A diversion. "A fire," she said. "On the west side. They will see the flames. They will think we are breaking out that way. They will all run to the fire. It will draw them." "And we go east," he finished, "into the arroyo." It was a good plan. It was her plan. "I will go," he said. "I will set the fire. When you hear them shout, you go to the drain. You do not wait." "No," she said, gripping his arm with her good hand. "We go together. I will not be left." "You are too weak to move that fast. I will be silent. I can—" The argument died in his throat. Ting! A small, metallic sound. It was not the clatter of the falling can. It was the sound of the pebble, shifting inside it. Nantan's hand clamped over hers. A silent command. He was on his feet, moving backward into the deepest shadow of the room, his rifle coming up. They both stared at the empty, black square of the window. A long second passed. The silence was absolute. Then, a shape, a shadow, blotting out the bright, starry sky. A man's head and shoulders, peering in. He was looking into the dark. He saw nothing. He was listening. And then he was gone. A whispered voice carried from outside. "Nothing. Just a room. I think they're gone." Another voice, hard and cold. Crow's voice. "They are not gone. They are waiting. Be patient." The shadow was gone, but they were out there. They were close, and they were ready. The silence in the shack was a living thing. It was a cold, heavy presence that pressed against Sarah's ears. Nantan was a statue of shadow, his rifle aimed not at the window, but at the dark, empty space of the doorway. Sarah held her breath, her good hand clutching the rough wool of the blanket. A sound, a soft, sliding scrape of a boot on the porch's wooden boards. Not the window, the door. Then a sudden, sharp clatter. The tin can, balanced so delicately, crashed to the floor, the pebble inside rattling like a snake. A man cursed, a raw, sharp sound of surprise. The door swung open, and a shape stumbled in. A man silhouetted against the field of stars. He had been expecting a dark, empty room. He had found a trap. Nantan did not move. He waited. The man scrambled to his feet, a pistol in his hand. "Who is in here? Show yourself!" He took another step, and Nantan, who had been shadow, became smoke. He did not move toward the man. He moved beside him, from the wall, a blur of motion that the man's eyes could not follow. It was not a fight. It was a conclusion. There was a sharp, wet sound of a gasp, a heavy thud as Nantan's rifle butt struck the man's wrist. The pistol clattered on the packed earth floor. The man cried out, but the sound was cut short as Nantan's hand found his throat. Nantan moved, a powerful, flowing motion, and slammed the man backward against the solid adobe wall. The man's head hit the earth with a dull, heavy sound. He slid to the floor, dazed, gasping for air. Sarah watched, her heart a hammer in her chest. She saw Nantan's knife flash in his hand, the starlight catching the blade. He knelt over the man, the point of the knife resting just under the man's jaw. The man, who was young, with a terrified, stubbled face, whimpered. He was crying, "Please, please, mister, do not. I was just following orders." He said, "Be still," Nantan commanded. His voice was a low vibration, colder than the night air. This was the moment. The man was helpless. This was the test of Nantan's law. Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders, the absolute power he held in that one hand. He could end this man's life. He did not. With a sigh, so quiet Sarah almost did not hear it, Nantan sheathed his knife. The man sobbed in relief. Nantan's work was not finished. With a speed that was almost brutal, he pulled the man's own gun belt free and used it to bind his wrists, pulling them tight behind his back. He ripped a strip from the man's own shirt and gagged him, pulling the knot so tight it was clear no sound would escape. The man was trussed, helpless, his eyes wide with terror. Nantan stood. He looked at the man. Then he picked up his knife again. The man flinched, a full body spasm of fear. Nantan did not touch his skin. Instead, he leaned down and with two quick, deliberate cuts, carved a mark into the thick leather of the man's vest. It was a simple, clear mark, a line, crossed by two others, a warning. He left the man on the floor. He was a message. Nantan turned to Sarah. The time for patience was over. The time for escape was now. Your plan, the fire. Sarah was already moving, pushing herself off the bed. Her body was weak, aching, but her mind was ablade. Yes, the shed, on the west. "I will go," Nantan said, grabbing his rifle. "Go to the drain. Now, when you hear them shout, you crawl. Do not wait for me. I will find you in the arroyo." "No," Sarah said, her voice fierce. She grabbed his arm with her good hand. "We do this my way. Nantan, together. I will not be left behind. I will not be the woman who waits." He looked at her, at the absolute resolve in her face. She was not a burden. She was his partner. He made the choice. He grabbed his flint and steel and a handful of dry tinder he had kept for a fire. "We go," he said. He moved to the door. Listening, he could hear voices, distant, confused. Crow's voice, sharp and angry. What was that noise, Jensen? Nantan did not wait. He slipped out of the door, low and fast, a shadow moving against other shadows. Sarah was right behind him. The air was cold, a shock after the stifling shack. She heard the men. They were on the far side, near the window. Nantan moved, not toward the men, but circling wide, toward the small, dilapidated woodshed. Sarah followed, her breath burning in her lungs, her splinted arm a heavy, awkward weight. They reached the shed. It was a pile of dry, silvered wood. Nantan knelt, piling the tinder against the driest wall. He struck the flint, once, twice. A spark caught. A tiny flame licked at the tinder. A shout, from the ridge, there. Movement, by the shed. Nantan did not wait for the flame to grow. He grabbed Sarah's hand. "Run!" They ran, not to the west, where the men were, but to the east, back to the shack. The men were shouting now, running toward the fledgling fire. It is a diversion. They are in the shed. Nantan pushed Sarah toward the fireplace. Inside the dark shack. "Go! Crawl! I am behind you!" She did not hesitate. She dropped to her hands and knees and found the black stone opening of the culvert. It was a hole of absolute blackness. It smelled of spiders and cold, damp earth. She fought back a wave of panic and plunged in. It was tight. Her shoulders scraped the stone. Her splinted arm jammed, sending a white-hot spike of pain up to her shoulder. She stifled a cry, twisted, and pushed forward with her good hand and her feet. She was a worm in the earth, crawling, blind, toward a freedom she could not see. Behind her, she heard Nantan enter the tunnel. Behind him, she heard a new sound, the whoosh of the dry shed catching fire, and the roar of Abel Crow. Fools. They are not at the fire. Search the shack. Sarah crawled faster. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Then she saw it. A circle of gray, starry sky. She pushed herself out, tumbling onto the soft, sandy bed of the arroyo. She was free. She was breathing, gasping in the cool, clean air. Nantan emerged a second later, silent as the shadow he was. He had the horse. It had been waiting, tethered in the arroyo's bend, all this time. Behind them, the sky over the ridge was glowing orange. The shouts were confused, angry. Nantan lifted her onto the horse's back. He mounted behind her. He did not speak. He did not look back. He nudged the horse, and they moved. A silent gray shape in a silent gray canyon, swallowed by the night. Abel Crow stood in the inferno of the burning shed. The heat washed over his face, but he felt only a cold, pure rage. He had been tricked. He had been made a fool of. They found Jensen, his deputy, in the shack. He was bound, gagged, the mocking, cryptic mark carved into his vest. Crow looked at the mark. He looked at the empty room. He saw the black hole of the fireplace. This was not a flight. This was an insult. The savage had touched his man, left his sign, and vanished. He had taken the white woman with him. Crow's righteous fury settled into a hard, cold purpose. He would not be beaten. If he could not catch the Apache in the wild, he would trap him in the world of men. "They are gone," his other deputies said, his voice awed, like smoke. "They are not gone," Crow said, his voice flat. "They are going to Willow Creek. It is the only place they can go." He turned to his horse. He was done with this chase. He was done with the patient hunt. He would ride ahead. He would use the law as a club. He reached into his saddlebag and his fingers closed around the hard, wooden handle of the knife. The knife he had taken from the scene of the Mesa Dog's raid. The knife still dark with the merchant Silas Green's blood. This was his evidence. This was his proof. He would arrive in Willow Creek first. He would tell the story of the murdering Apache, the leader of the Mesa Dogs, and his stolen, violated woman. He would light a fire of public outrage. And when Nantan and the woman walked into that town, the trap would not be a tin can on a string. It would be the entire, righteous and unbending law. They rode for 2 days, Nantan pushing the horse and himself to the limit. Sarah held on, her body a single, great ache. The escape had taken the last of her strength, but she was alive, and she was free. They arrived in Willow Creek as the sun was rising, turning the dusty, muddy Main Street a pale, hopeful gold. The town was not beautiful. It was a raw, unfinished place, a jumble of adobe houses, sagging canvas tents, and crude wooden storefronts. The air smelled of cold wood smoke, frying bacon, and mules. People were in the street. A miner, his face gray with dust, coughed as he walked. A Mexican woman, wrapped in a black shawl, carried a basket. 2 Chinese men hurried past, carrying poles laden with laundry. A few local Apache, their clothes a mix of hide and cloth, watched from the porch of the mercantile. They all stopped to look. They looked at Nantan, a warrior, armed, on his paint horse. They looked at Sarah, a white woman, her dress in ruins, her arm in a splint. Their gazes were curious, assessing, but not immediately hostile. This was Willow Creek. It was a town built on the edge of the world, a place where people came to get lost, or to get rich. They were tolerant, not out of kindness, but out of a deep, practical indifference. As long as it did not cost them money, or bring the law down on them, it was not their business. Nantan led the horse to a quiet side street, away from the main road. There was a small, neat adobe house, set back from the dust. A garden in the front was full of chili plants, and a woman in a black widow's dress was watering them. This was Valeria. Her face was a map of lines, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Nantan dismounted. He stood before her, not speaking, his hat not in his hand, but his posture one of respect. Valeria looked at him. She looked at Sarah. She saw the splint. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the money pouch Sarah clutched in her good hand. Another woman came from the house. She was older, her hair a cloud of white. This was Doña Inez. She was the town's midwife, its healer. Her eyes went straight to Sarah's arm. She spoke, her voice like dry leaves. "Buen trabajo," she said, touching the splint. "Good work, but it must be cleaned. The bone must be sure." Sarah slid from the horse. Her legs were shaking. She stood before Valeria, and she pulled the small pouch of coins from her dress. It was her inheritance, her last tie to her old life. "The house," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "It is for sale." Valeria nodded. She had seen desperation before. She had also seen coin. "It is." They needed supplies. Sarah left Nantan with the horse, under the shade of a small mesquite, and walked to the main street, to Rook's Mercantile. The store was dark, smelling of coffee, leather, and dried apples. The owner, Mr. Rook, was a large, balding man in a canvas apron. He was weighing beans for a miner. He saw Sarah. He noted her ruined dress, her sunburned face, her arm. He saw a woman in trouble. She asked for flour, for salt, for beans, for coffee. She put her coins on the counter. Mr. Rook's expression changed. The coins were real. His suspicion turned to a dry, practical courtesy. Business was business. He packed her goods. She returned to the adobe house. Valeria had drawn up a simple bill of sale. Doña Inez had brought a cup of water. These women, this fragile network, were not offering charity. They were offering a foothold. Sarah was counting the coins into Valeria's hand when the sound came. The thunder of horses, many riding fast, not a wagon team, a posse. A voice, high and cold, rang out, echoing from the storefronts. That is him! The murderer sees that man! Abel Crow. He was here. He sat on his horse in the middle of the street, his face a mask of righteous fury. He was not alone. He had 4 townsmen with him, men Sarah recognized from the mercantile, their faces set and grim. They held rifles. The street, which had been stirring with morning life, went silent. Everyone stopped. They turned. Crow dismounted. He walked toward Nantan, his duster coat flapping. He pointed a long, rigid finger. In the name of the law of the United States, I arrest you, Nantan, for the murder of the merchant Silas Green, and I arrest you for the abduction of this woman, Sarah Mitchum. The words were a hammer blow. Murderer, abduction. The crowd, which had been indifferent, was now a single, hostile entity. The miners, the cowboys, the freighters, their eyes turned on Nantan. They saw a savage. They saw a killer. Nantan did not move. He stood by his horse, his hands at his sides, his rifle still sheathed on the animal's flank. He was a statue of patience. Crow's men moved forward, fanning out, their guns raised. Wait. Sarah's voice. It was not a plea. It was a command. She stepped away from the porch. She walked directly between Nantan and the armed men. She faced Abel Crow. You are wrong, she said. Crow's pale eyes narrowed. Ma'am, step away. You are in shock. This creature has had you under his control. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying, Sarah shot back, her voice ringing with a strength she did not know she possessed. This man is not a murderer, and I was not abducted. My wagon broke, my arm was broken. He saved my life. He saved you, Crow laughed, a cold barking sound. He saved you after he and his gang of Mesa dogs butchered Silas Green. We found this at the scene, his knife. He held up the bloody knife. The crowd gasped. It was dark, stained. That is not his knife, Sarah said. He is a liar and a killer, and he will hang, Crow shouted, playing to the crowd. No, Nantan said. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Crow's rage. I will not run. This is a lie. He looked not at Crow, but at the townsman, at Mr. Rook, who had come to the porch of his store. I ask for a hearing. Let this town hear the truth, not one man's story. Rook stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. He was the voice of stability. Marshal, this is Willow Creek. We do not much like outsiders bringing their hangings to our street. It is bad for business. A public hearing? Tomorrow. That seems fair. The crowd murmured. They were volatile. But Rook was right. A lynching was messy. A hearing was justice. Crow saw the town turning. He saw their practical, stubborn nature. He was losing. Fine, he snarled. A hearing at sunup. But he does not walk free. He is my prisoner. Sarah saw her opening. She turned to Valeria. In a clear, loud voice, she said, I am buying this house for us. She poured the last of her coins into the widow's hand. It was a public declaration, a final, unbreakable commitment. She was not a victim. She was a resident. Valeria looked at Crow, his face black with rage. She looked at Sarah, so small and fierce. She closed her hand over the coins. She nodded. Crow motioned to his men. He is my prisoner. Lock him in the old storage shed. I will hold the key. Nantan did not resist. He did not fight. He handed his rifle to Mr. Rook, who took it, his face grim. He handed over the knife from his belt. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were calm. Patience. The men led him away. The crowd began to break apart, muttering, the excitement over. Sarah stood alone, on the porch of her new home. The sun was rising, but a cold, terrible shadow had fallen. The sword was hanging, and she had until dawn to find a way to stop it from falling. The shed was cold. Nantan had been left in the dark, in a small, Windowless storage space behind Rook's mercantile. He did not pace. He did not test the door. He sat, his back against the rough timber wall, and he breathed. He had been a prisoner of his own people. This was no different. He was a man of patience. He could wait. He trusted his law. And he trusted Sarah. Sarah did not wait. The moment the townsman had locked the shed and Abel Crow had pocketed the key, she turned, her face a pale, determined mask. The crowd was melting away. Back to their breakfasts and their work, their appetites for justice sated until morning. She walked back to the small adobe house, her house. Valeria and Doña Inez were waiting on the porch. The bill of sale, signed and paid, sat on a small wooden table. "He is a good man," Sarah said, her voice low and shaking. Not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. "That man, Crow, he is lying." Doña Inez, her ancient face a web of deep lines, nodded slowly. She looked at Sarah's arm. "The splint is good. The man who said it, he knows the body. He is a healer." "They call him a murderer," Sarah whispered, the word tasting like poison. "Men call the hawk a killer," Doña Inez replied, her voice like dry leaves. "But it only feeds its family. Crow, he is a different kind of hunter. He hunts for his own pride. It is a sickness." Valeria, ever practical, pointed to the knife Crow had held aloft. "That knife, it is the proof. Without the knife, he has only words. We must break the knife." How Sarah felt a stab of despair. "He says it is Nantan's." Doña Inez's dark eyes sharpened. "I am the midwife. I am the one who sews the wounds. I have seen the work of many blades in this town. Señora, I have pulled Apache arrows. I have sewn cuts from bar fights. And I have treated 2 men who were foolish enough to fight the mesa dogs. They died, but I saw the knives that made the wounds." A spark ignited in Sarah's chest. "You know the blades." "I know them," Doña Inez said. "The knives of the mesa dogs are crude. They are made from old files, or barrel hoops. They are sharpened on one side. They are heavy. An Apache knife. A warrior's knife is different. It is thin, light, balanced. It has 2 edges like a spear point. It is a tool for a quick life, not a butcher's tool." "The knife Crow held," Sarah said, closing her eyes. Remembering, it was thick, dark. It looked heavy. "We must see it," Valeria said, her arms crossed. "Rook, he is holding Nantan's real knife. He will have Crow's knife too. He is a man of business. He will have locked them up together." "He will not show us," Sarah said. "He is on Crow's side." "Rook is on Willow Creek's side," Valeria corrected her, a grim smile touching her lips. "He does not like trouble, but he hates a liar more. A liar is bad for business. Doña Inez, you will go. He respects you. Ask to see the Apache's knife. Say you need it to prepare. He will not ask why. And while he looks, you will see the other." Doña Inez nodded once. "I will go." "And I said Sarah will find a witness." "A witness?" Valeria looked skeptical. "Crow said he found the knife at the scene. He is a United States Marshal. But he is a man. First, he arrived here with a ready-made story. He must have heard it from someone. Or he met them, the dogs." "The cantina," Valeria said, her mind moving as fast as Sarah's. "If a man knows something, he drinks, and he talks, especially a man like Lyle. He is a drunkard, but he sees everything. He misses nothing. He lives on the crumbs of other men's secrets." Valeria grabbed her black shawl. "I will go. A man like Lyle will not talk to you. He will talk to me. For a price." The town was now fully awake. The sun was climbing. They had only hours until the hearing. The 2 women, the young widow and the old, split up. 2 strands of a desperate, secret investigation. And Valeria found Lyle exactly where she knew he would be, in the darkest corner of the El Gato Cantina, nursing a cup of watery, cold beer. He was a thin, weasel-like man. his eyes darting, his hands shaking. She sat down across from him. He flinched. "Lyle," she said, her voice quiet. "I ain't done nothing. Valeria," he whined. "I know. I am here to offer you a meal. A real meal. And this." She slid a silver dollar across the stained table. His eyes fastened on the coin. "What for?" "For talking. You were out last night, near the pass. You saw the marshal ride in." "I see lots of things," he said, his hand edging toward the coin. "You saw him before he rode into town. You saw him talking to the Mesa dogs the night before last." Lyle froze. His eyes widened. He licked his lips. "That is dangerous talk, Valeria." "It is true talk," she said, pushing the coin closer. "A hot meal. And this, for the truth." He looked around. The cantina was empty, save for the sleeping bartender. He grabbed the coin and made it disappear. "I was checking my traps. Up by the canyon, I saw a fire, small. Just 3 men. I thought it was them, the dogs. I hid. And it was them. I recognized their leader, the one they called Jed. But the other man, he was a white man, dressed in a duster, tall. He gave them something, a bag. They talked, angry. I heard the white man say Willow Creek. He said the Apache. Then he rode off. It was the marshal. It was Crow. I saw his face." Valeria's blood ran cold. He was not just lying. He was a partner. He was using the town as a weapon. "You will come with me," she said. "No, I ain't talking to no one. Jed would kill me." "You will write it," Valeria said, her voice iron. "I will buy you paper. You will write what you saw, and I will give you this." She pulled a second dollar from her pocket. "And a bottle. You can be drunk for a week. Or you can be sober when Mr. Rook finds out you kept this secret." Lyle's greed won. He nodded, his hands shaking. "I will write it." Doña Inez was just as successful. She returned to the small adobe house just as Valeria was sitting Lyle down at the kitchen table, a piece of paper and a pencil in front of him. Doña Inez looked at Sarah. Her face was grim. "I have seen them, both." And Sarah asked, her heart stopping. "The knife Nantan carried is Apache. It is thin, beautiful, balanced for a man's hand. The other the bloody one." She spat on the floor. "It is a pig sticker. A file. Pounded flat. Thick, heavy, sharpened only on one side. It is the work of the Mesa dogs. I am sure of it. They had it. They had the proof. The sun was high. It was time." Mr. Rook had not chosen the street. He had chosen his large, open warehouse, a place of business. It was neutral ground. The whole town, it seemed, was there. Miners, merchants, cowboys, the women in their dark dresses, the local Apache watching silently from the back. It was hot, and the air was thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and judgment. Nantan stood at the front, his hands unbound. Flanked by 2 townsmen with shotguns, he was calm. He was an island of stillness in the churning sea of faces. Abel Crow stood opposite, his 2 deputies, Jensen and the other, at his back. His face was a mask of cold law. "This is not a court," Mr. Rook announced, his voice booming in the large space. "We are not the law, but we are this town, and this town will not have a hanging based on one man's word. Marshal Crow, you will present your case. Then, the man Nantan will speak." Crow smiled, a thin, cold pulling of his lips. He held up the bloody knife for all to see. "This is the case. This blade was found by the body of Silas Green, a merchant. It is an Apache blade. This man, he pointed at Nantan, is an Apache. He was seen by my own scout, heading this way, with the woman he had abducted." He turned to Sarah. "We know you are scared, ma'am. We know what he has done to you. You do not need to be afraid anymore." Sarah stepped forward. Her voice did not tremble. "He did nothing to me. He saved my life. And that is not his knife. A murmur went through the crowd. Crow laughed. Of course she would say that. She is terrified. It is a known thing, but I have more. He pointed to the two deputies. These men were with me. We tracked him. We found him in a shack. He attacked my deputy, Jensen. He resisted arrest. He is a violent animal. Now, Rook said, turning, Nantan, you will speak. Nantan looked at the crowd. He looked at the hard, suspicious faces of the miners, men who had lost friends to raids. I did not kill that man, he said, his voice clear and measured. I have never seen that knife before. I did not abduct this woman. I found her by her broken wagon. Her arm was broken. I set the bone. She had a fever. I healed her. I brought her here because she asked me to. Lies, Crow shouted. You call me a killer, Nantan continued, his gaze finding Crow's. It is true. I was a warrior, but I was cast out by my own people. Do you know why? The crowd leaned in. Because I refused to kill, Nantan said. My chief ordered a raid on a homestead, a woman, children. I refused. I said I would not kill the helpless. For this, they called me a traitor. They said I had a white heart. I live by one law. My own, I will not kill unless I am forced, unless it is to protect my life, or the life of another. I did not kill Silas Green. The silence was profound. The miners, the cowboys, they were hard men, but they understood a hard code. They saw the man who had faced them, unarmed, and had not flinched. They began to doubt. Crow saw it. He saw the doubt in their eyes. He saw Rook's impassive face. He was losing. His authority was crumbling. He snapped. His face, which had been a mask of cold law, twisted into a mask of pure rage. He drew his pistol. This hearing is over. This is not justice. This is a mockery. Jensen Harris sees him, sees the savage. He fired his pistol, not at Nantan. At the roof, the shot was a deafening explosion in the warehouse. Splinters rained down. The crowd screamed, surging back. His two deputies, loyal or stupid, followed his order. They raised their own pistols, not at Nantan, but at the crowd, to force them back. Get back, all of you. It was chaos. It was the moment of violence Crow had craved. But Nantan was not a victim. He was Nantan. He moved. His law was not to kill, it was to protect. He moved toward the nearest deputy, Harris. The man was focused on the crowd, his gun waving. Nantan did not strike him. He grabbed the man's outstretched gun arm, twisting it, using the man's own weight to spin him around. He slammed the man's hand against the thick wooden pillar. The gun fired into the floor, and the deputy screamed as the pistol was wrenched from his broken fingers. Nantan pushed him, hard, into the other deputy, Jensen. Jensen stumbled, his shot going wide. He was off balance. Nantan was on him. He did not hit him. He used his open palm, striking Jensen's chest, a blow that did not break, but stunned, knocking the air from his lungs. The man folded, gasping, his gun falling. It had taken 3 seconds. It was not a brawl. It was surgery. 2 men, armed, were on the floor, disarmed, groaning. Nantan stood between them, breathing hard but untouched. He had not killed. He had not broken his code. He had ended the violence. The warehouse was silent. The crowd stared, awestruck. Abel Crow stood alone, his smoking pistol in his hand, his face a picture of disbelief and animal fury. He raised his gun, this time aiming it straight at Nantan's chest. "Hold!" Mr. Rook's voice was a cannon shot. He was holding a shotgun, and it was aimed directly at Abel Crow. "Marshal, you will put that weapon down, or I swear I will cut you in 2. Crow froze. He looked at Rook. He looked at the hard, angry faces of the townsmen, who were no longer on his side. He had lost. Slowly, his arm lowered. His pistol dropped to the floor. "Now," Rook said, his voice deadly calm. "We will finish this." "The knife," Sarah's voice was clear. "Cutting, Doña Inés, tell them." Doña Inés stepped forward. "I have seen the blade. It is a mesa dog knife. It is not Apache." Lies Crow hissed. "And this," Valeria stepped forward, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "This is the sworn statement of Lyle, the trapper. He saw you, Marshall, 2 nights ago. He saw you meeting with the Mesa dogs. He saw you give them money. He heard you plan this." Rook took the paper. He read it. His face, which had been grim, turned to stone. He looked at Crow. He held up the paper. "You brought this filth to our town. You used us. You lied. You framed this man to cover your own tracks, to make yourself a hero." He pointed to the bloody knife on the floor. "That knife. It is the proof. The Mesa dogs have a mark, a notched hilt. Lyle described it, and there it is." Rook nodded to his own men. "Seize this man. Lock him in the shed. He will wait for the circuit judge. He will hang for the murder of Silas Green." The power had shifted. The truth had come out. Crow, his face ashen, his eyes dead, did not resist as the townsmen grabbed his arms and dragged him away. The crowd began to disperse. They walked out into the bright sunlight, quiet, thoughtful. Their world tilted. They left Nantan and Sarah standing alone in the warehouse, in a patch of dusty sunlight. Sarah turned to him. The strength that had held her up, the rage that had fueled her, it all drained away. She began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. She had been so close. He had been so close. She stepped forward and fell against his chest, her good arm wrapping around his waist, her face buried in his shirt. She did not cry. She just shook. Nantan stood for a long moment, surprised by the contact. Then his own arms came up. He held her, his hand, so strong, so sure, rested on her back. He held her as she trembled, his own heart finally slowing from the fight. She looked up at him, her eyes still wide with the aftershock. It was so close. "Yes," he said. He looked down at her, his gaze soft, the warrior's edges gone. "Your way," she whispered. "You did not kill them." "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I did not. My way saved us. Not hot, not reckless. We waited. We saw the truth. We were patient, and the stone held." He held her for a long time. Outside, the town of Willow Creek went back to its business, but inside the warehouse, 2 people stood in the quiet. Sarah finally stepped back. She was exhausted, but she was smiling. She looked at the adobe wall of her new home, visible through the wide-open warehouse doors. The morning sun was hitting it, and the brown, earthy mud was glowing. It was the color of warm, rich honey. The warehouse was empty, save for the 2 of them. The dust motes, disturbed by the chaos, danced in the single shaft of sunlight from a high window. The sound of the crowd, the angry shouts, the thud of running boots, all faded. Abel Crow was gone. The immediate danger had passed. Nantan's arms were still around her. She was still pressed against his chest, her body still shaking with the terrible, cold aftershock of the confrontation. He was solid. He was warm. He was real. She had stood for him, and he had fought for them, and they were, impossibly, still standing. Slowly, she stepped back. Her legs felt weak, as if the strength she had borrowed from her own rage was now gone, leaving her hollow. She looked at him. His face was calm. The battle light already faded from his eyes. He had done what he had to do, and it was done. He bent and retrieved his knife, which lay on the dusty floor. He wiped the blade on his legging, not the blood of an enemy, but the dirt of the floor, and sheathed it. He looked at Mr. Rook, who was still standing by the door, his shotgun held loosely, his face a mask of weary, practical thought. Rook nodded once. He gestured to the rifle Nantan had surrendered. "That is yours. You earned it back." Nantan took his rifle. He did not check it. He simply slung it over his shoulder. He and Sarah walked out of the warehouse together. They stepped into the full, bright morning sun. The street was no longer a threat. The people who had been a mob just moments before were now just people. They were merchants sweeping their boardwalks, miners heading to the assay office, women carrying baskets. They watched Sarah and Nantan walk, but the watching was different. The hostility was gone. In its place was a new, wary, and profound curiosity. Some nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of respect. Others, the ones who had sided with Crow, looked away, their faces sullen and ashamed. They walked the short distance to the small adobe house, their house. Valeria and Doña Inez were on the porch. The piece of paper, the bill of sale, was on the table. Sarah, her hand still shaking, took the pencil. She signed her name, Sarah Mitchum. It was the last act of her old life, the last of her inheritance spent. She had traded all the money and the name of her past for this, for a small house of mud, on a street of dust, with this man. It felt like the first true bargain she had ever made. Valeria took the paper and folded it. "It is yours. Hija, the water in the well is low, but it is sweet. The walls are thick." Doña Inez looked at Sarah's arm, then at Nantan. Her eyes were sharp. She told Sarah, in her quiet, dry voice, that the bone was mending, but the rest of her was weak. The fever had burned away her reserves. She needed rest. She needed food. The women left, and then they were alone. The house was one room. It was cool and dark and empty. It smelled of earth and lime, and the faint, lingering scent of chili from Valeria's cooking. There was no furniture. There was only the packed earth floor, the walls, and the small, deep fireplace. For a long moment, they just stood there. The silence was vast. The entire world, which had been loud and fast and full of violence, had suddenly gone still. Nantan was the first to move. He did not speak of the fight. He did not speak of the future. He did what he had always done. He acted. He walked to the horse, which stood patiently under the mesquite, and began to unstrap their meager supplies: the waterskins, the blanket, the small bag of cooked rabbit meat. Sarah watched him. She felt a wave of exhaustion so profound she had to sit, her back sliding down the cool adobe wall. She was home, but home was just a word. Now, they had to build the meaning. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. It was not a rhythm of survival. It was a rhythm of construction. Their first act was to make a bed. Nantan went, not to the mountains, but to Rook's woodpile. He traded. He did not have coin. He traded his skill. He spent a day repairing Rook's broken wagon axle, the very thing that had begun this entire journey. His hands, so sure with a splint, were just as sure with the wood. He shaped, he fitted, he bound it with wet rawhide that dried as tight as steel. Rook, a man of his word, gave him the timber. Nantan built the bed frame in the corner of the room. He built it strong, and he strung it with rope. His knots precise, his lines pulled taut. It was a copy of the bed in the ruin, the bed where he had declared his way. But this one was new. It was a foundation. Sarah's work was the earth. The land behind the house was not a garden. It was a patch of sun-baked gravel and hard clay. She borrowed a spade from Valeria. Her arm was still weak, the splint still on, but she worked with her good hand, her body aching. She would dig for an hour, then rest, then dig again. She was breaking the ground. She was making a place for roots to grow. They bought 6 chickens from a Mexican family, trading the last of Sarah's silver buttons from her ruined dress. The sound of the chickens, their senseless, cheerful clucking, was the first sound of domestic life. It was a sound of hope. But hope did not pay for flour. The last of her money was gone, paid to Valeria. They were residents, but they were poor. They needed work. The town, which had accepted their presence, still held them at a distance. They were a curiosity, a story, but they were not yet part of the weave. The change came, as it always did in Willow Creek, through practicality. A geological survey team, funded by the railroad, arrived in town. They were Eastern men with soft hands and expensive instruments. They needed to map the high passes, to find water, to chart the territory. They needed a guide. The local guides, the trappers like Lyle, were drunkards or liars. The local Apache would not speak to them. Mr. Rook, his canvas apron stained with molasses, stood on his porch as the head surveyor. A man named Pendleton complained. Rook pointed, his thick finger aimed at Nantan, who was mending the broken corral fence beside their adobe. "You want a guide? There is your guide." Pendleton looked. He saw an Apache in leggings and a cloth shirt. He saw a savage. He scoffed. Rook was not a patient man. He told Pendleton, in his flat, booming voice, that the Apache was Nantan. He was the man who had faced down Marshal Crow, a man who had disarmed 2 deputies without a bullet, a man who knew the high country better than any hawk. He told him Nantan did not lie, and he did not drink. He was, Rook finished, reliable. In Willow Creek, it was the highest compliment. Pendleton, practical in his own way, offered Nantan the job. The pay was good. Nantan accepted. He was gone for a week. Sarah was alone in the adobe. It was the first time they had been apart since the wagon broke. The quiet of the house was profound. She felt his absence like a missing wall. This, she realized, was the new fear. Not the desert, not the law, but the absence of his stillness. While he was gone, she made her own peace with the town. Doña Inez came, her old hands gentle, and finally cut away the splints. Sarah's arm was a thin, scarred thing. The skin was pale, but the bone was whole. The healer had done his work. Sarah began to work her own. She flexed her fingers. She kneaded dough. The ache was deep, but she pushed through it. She needed her hands. She went to Rook's. She bought, on credit, a needle, thread, and a boat of plain cotton. She put a small sign in her window, a simple square of wood Nantan had planed for her, sewing and mending done. The first to come was Valeria, with a torn shawl. The next was a miner, his canvas shirt in ribbons. Sarah sat on her porch, in the shade, her needle flying, her fine, even stitches, a relic of her St. Louis parlor room, were a marvel in this rough town. She mended the tears. She patched the holes. She turned a ruined shirt into a new garment. She was paid in eggs. She was paid in flour. And then she was paid in coin. When Nantan returned, he was leading his horse, and he was carrying a bag of silver. He had found the surveyor's water in a place no one knew. He had seen the signs of a rock slide hours before it fell, saving their equipment. He was, Pendleton had declared, a man who could see the future. Nantan laid his coins on the table. Sarah laid hers beside them. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. It was their own. They had built an economy. The town began to change. The acceptance, born of necessity, began to soften. It was the children who came first. Sarah had used some of her first earnings to buy a small, battered guitar from Rook's. It was a thing of nicks and scratches, but the strings were whole. In the evenings, as the sun went down and the air turned cool and purple, she would sit on her porch and play. She played the songs her father had taught her, old, sad ballads from the mountains, quiet hymns, simple folk tunes. She did not sing loudly. She played for herself, for Nantan, who would sit on the porch step, mending a piece of harness, his hands never still. The children, first the Mexican children from the other adobes, then the miners' pale, rowdy sons, crept closer. They sat in the dust, a small, silent audience, just outside the weak circle of her lantern light. They listened. Their mothers, seeing their children were safe, that the savage was just a man mending a strap, and the abducted woman was just a woman playing music, softened. They began to nod. They began to wave. Valeria brought over a pot of beans. Doña Inez brought seeds for the garden. The men followed, the freight runners, the prospectors. They had heard the story from the surveyors. They came to Nantan, not for talk, for work. They needed a guide. They needed someone to find water. They needed someone to watch their back trail. They trusted him. They trusted his eyes and his silence. But the peace was not total. There was still a core of resentment. Harris, the deputy, whose hand Nantan had broken, had left town, but Jensen, the other, remained. He and a few others, men who had believed in Crow, who hated what Nantan stood for, would gather at the cantina. One afternoon, Sarah was walking back from the mercantile, her arms full of supplies. Jensen and two of his friends were on the boardwalk. They blocked her path. They did not speak. They did not touch her. But they stood, their faces hard with drink and a sullen, lingering hatred. Jensen spat in the dust, just at the hem of her skirt. Sarah stopped. The woman from St. Louis would have shrunk. The woman from the desert ruin would have been terrified. The woman from Willow Creek simply waited. She looked at Jensen, her gaze as flat and as patient as Nantan's. She did not speak. She did not move. She just held her ground. Jensen, who had been expecting fear, saw none. He saw only a woman he did not know, a woman who was not afraid of him. He muttered a curse, his face flushing, and stepped aside. Sarah walked past, her head high. She had held the line. The conflict was not gone. It was a living, breathing thing, but it was small, it was organic, and it was held in check, not just by her or by Nantan, but by the town itself. Rook, watching from his doorway, had seen the whole thing. He had picked up a barrel stave. He had not needed to use it. The garden grew. It was, as Sarah had known, a battle. The soil was stone, but the seeds from Doña Inez were stubborn. They worked the ground, adding ash from their hearth, manure from the chickens. And one morning, Sarah saw it, a single pale green shoot of corn, not 2 inches high, pushing its way up between two pieces of gravel. She knelt, her hand hovering over it. It was so fragile, it seemed impossible. She called Nantan over. He came and looked. He crouched beside her. He looked at the tiny, defiant sprout. He did not speak. He just reached out one finger and very, very gently touched the pebble beside it, moving it a fraction of an inch to give the plant more room. It was hope. It had roots, and it was theirs. That summer, the rains came. It was a rare, violent gift. The sky, which had been a white iron sheet for months, turned a deep, bruised purple. Thunder cracked over the mesas, and the rain fell. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a roar, a flood that turned the dusty street into a river of mud. They sat inside their adobe. The roof, which Nantan had patched with mud and straw, was holding. The sound was immense, a deafening drumbeat on the earth above them. The small room was lit only by the flickering of a single candle and the white, sudden flashes of lightning. They were on the rope bed. The night was cool. Nantan lay on his back, his hands behind his head. Sarah lay beside him, on her side, her head resting on his shoulder. Her good arm was draped across his chest. Her other arm, her mended arm, lay between them, her hand resting over his heart. They did not speak. They did not need to. They listened. They listened to the sound of the world being washed. It was a baptism. All the dust, all the blood, all the fear was being carried away. This was not the fire of passion. It was something deeper. It was the profound, quiet peace of an arrival. It was the end of the long, hard run. He was not her savior. She was not his burden. They were just two people, in a bed they had built, in a house they had bought, listening to the rain. It was a ritual. It was the silent, conscious affirmation of their choice. They were home. The rains passed. The corn, watered by the storm, shot upward. The garden began to thrive. And Sarah began to change. It was a slowness, at first a new deep weariness in the mornings that had nothing to do with the fever, a new, strange awareness of her own body. Doña Inés saw it on one of her visits. She did not ask. She just looked at Sarah, at the new, soft fullness in her face, at the way she rested her hand on her stomach. The old healer's eyes crinkled. She nodded once and left a bundle of dried herbs on the table. For morning sickness. She was pregnant. When she told Nantan, they were on the porch, watching the sun set. The news sat between them, a massive, beautiful, terrifying thing. It was not a simple joy. It was a joy, yes, a deep primal pull that made Sarah's heart ache, but it was wrapped in fear. What world was this? What place was this for a child of two bloods, who would be seen as a half by both, a creature of the seams, just like his father? Nantan was silent for a long time. He watched the last sliver of sun disappear, leaving the sky a deep, aching purple. He saw the fear in her eyes. He finally spoke. He did not speak of the town or the world. He spoke of them. He said this child would not be a half, this child would be whole. It would be theirs. They made a pact, sitting on that porch as the first stars appeared. They did not write it down. They spoke it, their voices low, their words a promise in the cooling air. He would teach the child his language. He would teach the child to read the earth, to know the way of the hawk, to understand the patience of the stone. He would give the child the strength of the Apache. She would teach the child her language. She would teach the child to read books, to play the music, to know the stories of her father. She would give the child the world of her people. Their child would not be forced to choose. Their child would be given both. It would be their bridge. It would be the first true citizen of their new world. The work of building a life was no longer just for them. It was for the one who was coming. The sweat was not for survival. It was for a legacy. Winter passed. The high, cold winds of the mountains scoured Willow Creek, and the world held its breath. The cornstalk in their garden, which had been a symbol of hope, was now a dry, brown husk, rattling in the cold, but its roots were deep. Inside the adobe, a new life was waiting. Spring came, as it always did, with a sudden, violent rush of green. The snow on the high peaks melted, and the small creek that gave the town its name ran high and fast. The garden, which Sarah and Nantan had turned and fed with ash and manure, was alive with new shoots. And then, in the suffocating heavy heat of early summer, the time came. The labor was long. It was hard. The small adobe room became a crucible, hot and airless, the sun pressing down on the mud roof. Doña Inés was there, her ancient wrinkled hands surprisingly strong, her voice a low, steady murmur of Spanish and English. Valeria was there, her practical nature a constant motion, wiping Sarah's face with cool cloths, keeping the water pot full, her presence a silent, female solidarity. Nantan was not absent. He did not wait outside. He was, as he had always been, an anchor. He sat on the floor by the rope bed they had built, his back against the wall. He was a point of stillness in the swirling pain. He did not speak. He did not offer useless words of comfort. He just was. When Sarah, in the depths of her trial, cried out, her hand flying out, it was his she found. His grip was not soft. It was solid. It was the grip of the man who had set her bone, the man who had held her on the horse. It was the grip of the stone. She held on to it. She pushed against the pain. She was not a lady from St. Louis. She was a woman of the desert, and her body, hardened by sun and labor, knew its work. After a night and a day, in the deep, velvet quiet just before dawn, the final cry came. It was not a cry of pain. It was a cry of arrival. Doña Inés, her face beaded with sweat, laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "Es una niña," she whispered. "A girl." She cleaned the child, her movements practiced and gentle, and wrapped her not in fine linen, but in a simple, soft piece of cotton Sarah had sewn. She placed the small, squirming, red-faced bundle in Sarah's arms. Sarah looked down, her body an ocean of exhaustion and a sharp, shocking new love. She was perfect. Nantan moved from the wall. He knelt by the bed. He looked at the child. His face, usually so composed, stripped bare. He was seeing a miracle. He was seeing a future he had never believed he would have. He reached out one long, calloused finger, the finger that had tracked enemies and found water, and he gently, so gently, touched the baby's cheek. He mirrored the same gesture he had given the first corn sprout, life. "Elena," Sarah whispered, the name she had chosen. It was not her mother's name. It was not a name from her past. It was a name for this land, a name that sounded Spanish, like Valeria and Doña Inés, a name that felt like the sun. Nantan tested the word. Elena. He nodded once. It was a good name. It was strong. It was a bridge. Life settled. It was no longer the sharp, high-wire act of survival. It was the deep, rhythmic work of living. Elena was a quiet child, with her mother's blue eyes and her father's thick black hair. She slept in a cradle Nantan had woven from willow branches, a perfect, strong basket. A few weeks after her birth, Mr. Rook walked over from the mercantile. He was not a social man, and his visit caused Sarah a moment of sharp, residual anxiety. He was carrying a letter. "This is not for you," he said, his voice its usual gruff rumble. He held it out. "It is for the town. From the circuit judge in Tucson. But you earned the right to hear it first." Sarah and Nantan stood on their porch. Rook unfolded the paper. He summarized. The words were dry, legal, but the meaning was a thunderclap. Abel Crow had been tried, the testimony from Lyle, combined with the evidence from the army, who had finally captured the remnants of the Mesa Dogs, had been overwhelming. Jed, the leader, had confessed. He confirmed that Marshal Crow had been paying them, using them as a private army to cleanse the territory, and to build his own reputation. He had planned to use the murder of Silas Green to ignite a war only he could win. Abel Crow had been found guilty of conspiracy, of murder, and of violation of his oath. He was sentenced to life in the territorial prison at Yuma. He was gone. The shadow that had stretched from the broken wagon to this porch was finally, truly, gone. And Jensen, Sarah asked, thinking of the sullen, angry man. "Left town," Rook said, folding the letter. "Heard he went south, to Mexico. Good riddance, bad for business." He looked at Nantan. The respect in his eyes was no longer grudging. It was plain. "The surveyors are back. End of the month. They sent a wire. They said they will not go without you. They will pay double." Nantan nodded. "I will be here." Rook grunted, satisfied. He looked at the sleeping baby in the cradle. He called you a killer, but he was the butcher. Strange world. He put his hat on and walked away. The prejudice was not gone. Sarah knew that. There were still women in the town who crossed the street. There were still men who would not meet Nantan's eye. But it was no longer a weapon. It was no longer the law. It was just the sour, fading opinion of small men. Nantan was not the Apache. He was the best guide in the territory. His skill, his integrity, his way had become his new name. That evening, the air was soft, the heat of the day finally breaking. The sky was a deep, impossible shade of violet, the first stars sharp as diamonds. Nantan was on the porch step. He was not mending harness. He was not cleaning his rifle. He was holding Elena. He held her against his chest, her small head fitting perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. He looked at her with the same quiet, patient, absolute focus he had once used to watch the high ridges. Sarah came out, her guitar in her hand. She sat on the step beside him. She did not play. She just watched them. She leaned her head against his shoulder. His shirt was coarse, and it smelled of dry wood and sage. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of home. "In St. Louis," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost just a breath. "I was never alone. There were dinners and church socials and calls to make. I was always surrounded. And I was the loneliest person I knew." Nantan did not speak, but he shifted, his arm coming around her shoulder, pulling her and the child closer. "I was invisible," she continued, sorting through the new, true words. They saw a widow, or a daughter, or a prize. They never just saw me. I did not think it was possible to be known. Nantan looked out at the darkening land. He knew that loneliness. He had lived it, cast out by his people, hunted by hers. He was a ghost, a man who lived in the seams, belonging nowhere. "To be a ghost," he said, his voice a low rumble. "To walk between, it is a long, cold walk." Sarah turned her head, her cheek resting against his shoulder. She looked at his strong, brown hand, so large and gentle, as it cradled their daughter. "I do not feel invisible anymore. Nantan, when you look at me, you see me, all of me, the fear, the strength, the foolishness. You see it all, and you are still here." "You are here," he replied, as if it were the simplest, most obvious fact in the world. She smiled. "I was so wrong. I came west looking for a place, for a piece of land, a piece of sky. I thought that was what belonging meant." "My people say belonging is the earth," Nantan said. "The place of your ancestors, the ground that holds their bones. They were wrong, too." "Belonging is not a place," Sarah whispered. "It is a person," he said. "It is this," she said, her hand coming to rest on his, over their sleeping child. "It is a choice, one we make, every day." The last of the sun's light, a final, brilliant wash of gold and apricot, struck the front of their adobe. Sarah looked at it. She remembered the first ruin, the dead ranch. It had been this same color, the color of dry, dead earth. But this was different. The adobe was glowing. The light was not just on the walls. It seemed to be radiating from within them. It was the color of honey. It was the color of warmth. It was the color of life. She thought of the journey. She thought of the fear, the fever, the pain. She thought of love. It was not the fast, burning fire she had read about in books. It was this. It was the strength to hold back, to be patient, to build. It was a disciplined freedom. It was a choice. She thought of justice. It was not the cold, perfect law of a man like Crow, who invented enemies to make himself a hero. It was the messy, human truth of the warehouse. It was seeing what was real and having the courage to stand by it. And she thought of maturity. It was not the avoidance of pain. It was the willingness to pay the price. They had paid. They had paid with their old lives, with their safety, with their fear. And they had bought this quiet, this peace, this home. The seasons turned again. Elena grew. She was a toddler, walking with a sturdy, fearless confidence. And the future they had promised her began to take shape. One morning, a group of children gathered in their yard, the Mexican children from down the street, the pale, tow-headed children of the miners, and two shy, dark-eyed Apache children from the small camp outside of town. They sat on a blanket, under the shade of the growing corn. Sarah was with them. She was not sewing. She held a large piece of slate and a piece of chalk. She drew a letter. She was teaching them. It was the start of the school she had dreamed of. Valeria sat on the porch, watching, a proud, quiet smile on her face. On the same day, on the other side of town, Nantan was with the older boys. He had taken them to the arroyo. He was not teaching them to fight. He was teaching them to see. He crouched, pointing to a track in the dry sand. "Coyote," he said. "He is not hunting. He is going to water." He showed them a small, tough plant, this root. "You chew it for a snake bite." He led them to the hidden, weeping spring. "This is life. You do not waste it. You do not foul it. You protect it." He was teaching them his law. Not the law of the raid, but the law of the stone. Patience, respect, a quiet, gentle pride in knowing the world, not in breaking it. That evening, they were on the porch again. The ritual of their life. The children were gone. The town was settling. Elena was asleep inside, in her willow cradle. The sound of Sarah's guitar, a soft, simple melody, hung in the cool air. She finished the song. The silence that fell was comfortable, complete. She looked at Nantan. He was watching the first stars appear. She thought of that terrible night in the shack, the night the fever had returned, the night he had held her and declared his way. "Now we do this my way." She reached out and laid her hand on his. He turned, his dark eyes finding hers. "Now," she whispered, "we do this our way." He looked at her, at his wife, at the mother of his child. His hand, the warrior's hand, the healer's hand, turned, his fingers lacing with hers. "Every day," he said. "Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And we invite you to subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales, like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.